the most watched hand I've ever played was getting my aces cracked in the main event.
You're here
One
late
time.
on basics. Watches this river card come down.
One
The
time.
king comes home for Timothy Sue.
There was a period of time where I thought Dwan was the best player in the world.
I'm the biggest fish in town.
No, there's Tom.
People
are flying now.
And then with solvers, I think it helped because one, it was like, okay, actually, Tom is kind of a fish. I probably underestimated how big a buffer I needed to account for online cheating. Holy shit, 50K is a lot of money. I don't want to lose this guy's 50K doing something stupid.
That I would definitely fall into the first camp. I'm pretty. Thank you guys for tuning in to what's going to be another great episode of the Mechanics of Poker podcast. Quick announcement, we have seats open for our Mechanics of Poker coaching program. If you want to work with me and Adam and have us help you make more progress in your poker career, you can apply using the link down below or go over to mechanicsofpoker.com. Without further ado, guys, enjoy this episode. Sam, you're one of the only high-stakes players who is publicly documenting your mistakes in detail on your Substack, Punt of the Day. Most players actually usually like to hide their errors or write strategy pieces about how well things are going, and how great plays they're making. I've definitely been guilty of that, posting great plays on YouTube. But you choose kind of the opposite path, right? Why did you do that? And what made you comfortable breaking that taboo and turning your mistakes into your content, your framework, and almost like your identity as a learner?
I think so much of what happens with poker specifically is there is this. The hardest part, I think, of playing poker to some degree is dealing with the financial stress as you're playing it. There's this element of it where, and because of that, when you make a mistake, you feel it in your bones in the way you might not say if you make a mistake, playing video games or cooking or anything else in your day-to-day life. So I think part of it stems from the fact that I remember my mistakes a lot more than I remember my great hands, especially in tournaments, because in tournaments there is again, kind of this video game element where you're going along, you're surviving, you're getting to the next level, and then you die. And you're oh, that's all you can remember how it ended. Where there were times where I won a tournament and somebody's do you remember this hand? You busted me with 22 people left, and I'm I have no idea. I beat you, I won, I was on to the next step, So I do think that this element where the hands you mess up are the hands you remember the most. And I think that applies for cash games as well. But yeah, that for me in terms of learning, that's how I've always learned. Those are the hands that gnaw at me and where I really dig in and all that.
So you kind of use that elemented emotion to really zoom in on the hand to try to learn from it. Does it ever get in the way? Because I can imagine if there's a lot of emotion around a mistake, maybe you have trouble sleeping at night,
Yeah, the emotion does get in the way, but I've played enough where I'm pretty, I can deal with the ups and the downs. I could deal with the sense of stepping back and trying to analyze a play objectively and kind of see what's going on. And that's some of the other ones. Sometimes there's hands where I play them and your immediate emotional reaction is oh, I fucked up so much. This guy's such a nit. How could I possibly call there? He's never bluffing. And then especially when you're watching stream tournaments, you see a hand an hour and a half later where the guy runs a big bluff. So that's part of the other thing where there are hands where in the moment, I'm this was the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life, especially because so often in any form of poker, it's about taking long odds, right? Somebody bets half pot on the river and you're oh, this guy's never bluffing here. He always has it. But then in the back of your head, you only need to be good 25% of the time. So then when you step back, you can say, well, is he truly never bluffing here? Or do you think he's just bluffing whatever, 27% of the time, and you need to call, and it's not that close. So that's the other element I like about it as well. And the other thing about just the concept of analyzing my mistakes, it also stemmed from a frustration with the way specifically high roller regs were kind of portrayed, where they go Steven Chidwick has never made a mistake in his life, if he ever like gets a pre-flop hand wrong, like it's, he knows every single chart and like he's never done anything wrong ever. And I do think the idea of being like, when I talk to a lot of these people, because they're my peers and my friends, and they're just like, oh, I fucked that one up. Or like, oh, I was so sure that I had a live read on this guy and he just had it. Or like whatever the thing is. And yeah, because so much of sort of like poker content, poker whatever is about, I won $10 million and I'm going to teach you how to make money and I'm the best and I never make a mistake. And that stuff always bothered me because that's how you learn. You make mistakes, like in anything, you make mistakes and you learn from them.
That's indeed a very healthy way of looking at mistake. I'm pretty sure your relationship with mistake wasn't always like this, right? Or is this something that evolved over the last 20 years of playing? What did like the early career Sam believe about mistakes compared to the Sam who writes this blog today? How has it evolved, your relationship with mistakes?
I mean, I think I don't have I've accomplished enough in poker where I don't have an ego where I feel the need for people to be impressed by my play. I think that's the big part. I think fundamentally, I remember being at a table with Ike, Adamo, Fedor, and myself. And this is when Adamo was on like the big heater he was on. And they said, if you would rather play like perfect poker, mistake-free poker in a day, or win, what would you rather pick? And Ike and I were both like, win. Like, definitely win. Like, so my point is that I think you have this intellectual thing of being like, well, these are my mistakes. I'll analyze them. I'll look back at them. I'll get better. I'll perfect it. But the fundamental thing is nothing hurts as much as the feeling of like losing in the moment. If like I'm competitive like that, and I think most people are, so like I recognize that's how you need to learn. That's how you get better. You learn from your mistakes. But at the same time, I'm still like, no, I never wanted to make a mistake. Every time I make a mistake, I'm beating myself up. I'm like, how could you be so stupid? You should have known better, whatever.
Yeah, so kind of what you said there, right? You use kind of this frustration as fuel to look at these hands and use them to get better. You said that you can now do that because you don't have an ego anymore. How was that earlier in your career, though, when you probably still had very much an ego, which I think often likes to blind or kind of blind our mistakes, right? We kind of make an excuse of why this could be good. How was that earlier in your career?
It was, I mean, I still do have an ego. I think the thing that has gone away is kind of I'm more secure with what I am. I've shown that I've a good poker player and deserve kind of the success that I have. And that was more, especially back in the day when there was such variation in styles. And you would look around and you would go, basically every single player was doing something that by current standards would be terrible. Not mediocre, like absolutely terrible. So I would look around and I'd see there were guys like, who were just like opening 7-2 off under the gun if they thought it was like the right table or something. And I would be like, how is this guy winning? That's terrible. Everyone knows it's a terrible play. They're so bad. Then at the same time, they would be opening 7-2 off under the gun, and maybe I would be folding king queen off in the cutoff. So their open is bad, my fold is bad. We're both making bad plays. And I think at that point, you had this, since there was such a variation in styles and kind of the games you were playing were a little less about execution and a little more about kind of like macro bets about what the correct way to play poker is. This is my way to play, this is your way to play. We'll play it for, a year and we'll see who ends up winning. That made me a lot more like frustrated, have more of an ego because I would look around and see all the mistakes people I felt were making. And they were making, but I was maybe a little blind to my own mistakes because I didn't know any better. The game was not that developed. And then I also feel I got good enough at solver poker early enough where like I moved to the kind of next step of acceptance about it because it used to really be a thing where when solvers first came out, that you'd like look at the grid afterwards and be like, oh, like he raised when it's a pure fold or whatever. And now I think the people have gotten better at kind of playing this hybrid form of poker, and you're like, well, okay, so he missed a pure play, but it cost him a tenth of a big blind. Who really cares? And I think when you first started Solver, it was like almost like a textbook. You know, it had like an answer guide, and you could like, you know, show somebody the answer and be like, see, you were wrong. You shouldn't have won that pot. And then the more you play, the more you realize now that you need to balance actually playing poker versus humans with your technical knowledge, and that being good at a poker test is not the same as being an actual good poker player. They're different skills.
I guess that kind of, we could call it over adjustment when the solver just came out. It does feel kind of natural, right? Because for so long, like you said, we didn't really know what was right or wrong, and now we finally had like a baseline. So now we could finally say, you see, I knew it. You were wrong all that time, you know. So
yes.
Obviously that was kind of the only context that we had. You said that at that point you gave the example of he opened 7 deuce under the gun. You folded king queen off, so you kind of both make a mistake, but you liked to highlight, right? Oh, you were doing something wrong, and you were maybe kind of blind of your own mistakes. Do you recall like a moment in your career where that shifted, where you were like more, okay, I'm maybe pointing too much at what other people are doing wrong, but I'm actually not making the correct adjustments? I actually recognize this. For a long time in my career, I was getting angry at people, and then at some point I kind of realized I'm actually sort of angry at myself because I kind of know that there's something there, but I'm not taking advantage of it.
I don't know if there was a specific spot. I think a lot of it, the other thing is age too. Like I started playing when I was, 15 or 16. So then when you're like 23, it's easy to get very mad, especially when you're say 23 and maybe have like, you know, like you're at a point where if you win like an extra $100,000, extra $200,000, it will make a huge difference in your life. And you look around and like the nature of especially tournaments, and especially back then, was like every Sunday somebody was going to win the Sunday Million. You know, every like WSOP somebody was going to win some massive 1K and get like this big score. And I think that also tied into it where. I think a lot of it was just me maturing, basically, that all the things I still feel, you know, if I lose a big pot to like somebody who, Alex Ponikoff turns over like queen 3 off and wins a big pot with me, there's still like a part of me that's mad. I'm a competitor. I lost a pot in like a stupid way. I think I've just become better at managing it. And it's not as like I'm able to be like, okay, so what's the correct adjustment to somebody who might show up with this hand in this situation, and less like, oh, this guy got so lucky, it's unbelievable, you know?
Yeah, so you turned where in the past it was maybe just pure emotion. Now you turned it into something practical as well. There's something after. Okay, what can we take from this? Yeah,
like that's another thing about solvers. Where now at least you can like guide an exploit in some way. Like this is my go-to example for this, but in like 2008, if you said somebody bets small, how often should you raise? Somebody bets big, how often should you raise more or less? And nobody really knew the answer. I knew people who said, oh, they bet big, so like they're betting more poorly, so you should raise more often because you're going to generate folds because they're betting poorly, you know, which is like not the worst logic in the world, but it's wrong. When people bet smaller, you raise more often. And like even simple things like that you didn't even know what the correct like adjustment to counters were. You were just like, they were opening, you know, that was a big edge that some of those guys had, where they would open like so wide, and then people would be afraid to 3-bet them because they're crazy. They're opening 7-2 off. We're like, now I would just go, you know, fine, if I have king jack suited, like I'm 3-bet calling you or whatever, we're all in, let's go. So I think that was the other thing. Like now with solvers, you at least have some sort of baseline of like, okay, what actually is the way to do it? Well, before you would like talk to people for like months and be like, how do I adjust for this player's play? And you still might not really figure it out.
Yeah, there was more insecurity, I guess, right? You needed more. Now you have
Yeah.
kind of the confirmation. You see the sim, you know what's correct. You put in his strategy and you see the correct counter strategy. And you're like, okay, go. And in the past it
Yeah.
was, well, I don't know. I'm gonna give this a shot. Do you think like in the past, I don't know in which camp you were you good? You think in like making quick adjustment and kind of backing yourself if you thought it was the right thing to do, or do you really think like solvers really helped you kind of give the kind of that confirmation so you could exploit more freely?
I think there were specific things I was good at exploiting. Like one thing that was really big at the time in MTTs was really small 3-bets and 4-bets. And I would just be like, I'm calling. Like if I make it too big, because that was kind of what people were banking on. I would make it 2 big blinds. You'd make it 4.5 big blinds. And people would say, I read in a book you're not supposed to call a 3-bet out of position with King Jack off. So they would fold. Right? Now, when they make a 4.5 and they're 3-betting every offsuit ace in the deck, hey, you have a pretty easy call with King Jack off. So, for instance, I was good at that. I was good at being like, if they're going to give me this price, I'll call. But then I had like a leak I had, for instance, was I played very passively out of position because I basically believed if you would range disadvantage, which I basically thought as being a nuts disadvantage, then like you can't check raise the flop. So if like under the gun raised and the flop were like ace 10-7 or something, I just would, if I had a set of sevens, I'm not check raising. I'm just playing defensively. I'm just playing passively. So like, in the one hand, I was able to outsmart the guys who were 3 and 4 and 5 betting really small. And on the other hand, I was not good at sort of like playing out of position and getting value out of hand. And that's kind of how I feel everyone was. There were some strengths they had and some like weaknesses they had. And you just hoped, like I think a lot of the best players at the time were players whose just natural poker game happened to line up with the game conditions perfectly. Like they were very good poker players as well, but it just worked out perfectly for them that those were the games that they could do well at. And then the other kind of thought I had was when there was a period of time where I thought Dwan was the best player in the world. And then I watched how Tom played and I thought to myself, well, I could never play like that. I can never play that style. He played so crazy, so aggressively, made all these big hero calls, did all this crazy stuff. And I thought that's what made him so good. And I thought there's no way I could play like him. So I could never be, as good as him because I can't play like him. And then with solvers, I think it helped because one, it was like, okay, actually, Tom is kind of a fish. He's doing all this like terrible stuff all the time. And then it gave me sort of a roadmap and a guideline of like, okay, this is how to play. Like it, just as I said, some of the other guys were good because their natural poker skills lined up. I think my natural sort of like skills were like, I have a very good memory. I'm good at sort of like pattern recognition. I'm good at that sort of stuff. Lined up very well for the solver era. I like having sort of a more rules-based strategy where I can be confident in my ability to execute. I tend to prefer that to like freestyling. So yeah, I think in that sense, like solvers were just very good for me. I don't even think I'm like the guy who did the most studying. I just think I'm somebody who naturally can glean a lot of information with a short time with the solver, and that just worked out well with my like natural skills.
You already mentioned like a couple of mistakes there or leaks that you had. You write out mistakes daily nowadays in your blog. So I know there are many, right? If you can write one every day, you have a good memory set, especially the ones that hurt, right? The mistakes you remember the most. So you found a good match there. Which mistakes do you think had the biggest impact on your evolution as a player? Like the ones that changed how you think, or the ones that you think improved your game the most? And what was kind of the lessons that you learned? Like I said, I know you write a lot, but do any ones stand out that really were like, oh, this was definitely these ones had a big impact on my career?
I could specifically remember there was kind of a funny hand I played in a high roller in Prague, I think with the 50, and I had a hand where I had ace jack and I raised, and Martin Cabral called in the big blind. and it was like A7-2, and it went check back call, and then the turn was a whatever brick check, and I bet like 2/3 pot, and he called, and then the river was whatever a blank in such a way where Ace Jack was right on the cusp of being a value bet on the river or not. And I remember talking to Ike about the hand, and Ike at the time was more studied than me. I guess he had been playing a lot of like heads up, so he was kind of a little more familiar with all the different options on solver. And he's like, you should have overbet the turn. He's like, you get all your value out of Ace Jack. You bet a large enough size on the turn such that you feel comfortable enough checking back the river because you got all the value on the turn. And I also remember kind of like a flip side of that hand, which was in like a scoop high roller, OTB Red Bear and overbet the turn versus me in a kind of similar spot. And I had like a set or top two or something like that. And I was tanked for so long because I just did not know what he was representing with this bet. And then I got, again, kind of insecure where I'm like, he's a cash game player. I'm a tournament player. He's probably is he trying to like trick me into punting by betting big with a good hand, but I have a good hand, or is he trying to push me around or whatever? And I ended up raising the turn and he just snap folded. And both those hands were ones where I'm like, oh, through this whole, like understanding overbetting on the river in kind of toy game situations is something that was pretty easy to like understand. Like, hey, you have the nut flush blocker, you got to go all in for 5x pot, and you got to go all in when you have the nut flush. Pretty easy. But I distinctly remember those hands being like, oh, I'm just kind of like stuck in kind of like betting the same sizes when all these players who are like the best and at the time playing the highest stakes versus each other are playing this whole other like different form of poker that I'm totally like unfamiliar with. And that was like a big thing where I'm like, oh, you need to start figuring this out, because if they were doing it, like if I mean at that point I was in like live high rollers playing with them, and I'm like, well, if they're doing it, they have a reason for it. They're doing it for a reason. You need to figure out why and how to implement it into your game.
What did you do with that information? You went home and?
I mean, I think it just became something where, it used to be like one of the things that before the GTO Wizard days is you just become setting up sims or running them, especially on like, 2017 or 18 desktops, even if you bought like a state-of-the-art one, everything just took so much longer. And then what happens is you eventually got to the point where you see like 50, you see 100 sims, you start realizing how you should build trees, and you can build them efficiently and put in the right bet sizes and like all those sorts of things. And then like when you're just doing even just simple hand history lookup things like, oh, this hand was tough, you at least have some shape of what it's supposed to look like. And I think that was the big one where like I would probably just make really simple trees. I wouldn't think of putting in like unusual bet sizes. A solver is a tool, and like it's only as good as your ability to use it. And I think what I needed to do is observe, like I wasn't good enough at using it, and then by observing people play and seeing weird plays, that's kind of how I became good at using it. I'm like, why would they do this? How did they do this? Like, what's the reason? Is it actually a play, or are they trying to exploit me? Whatever, or did they make a mistake? And that sort of stuff, I think over, because that's such a simple node, right? Like, you raise, big blind defends, check back call, turns a brick, check, you fire. Like, that's one of the sort of simpler spots you'll get into. And then realizing like, oh, I'm supposed to bluff with hands that aren't draws, like just being like, hey, like if it's Ace-7-2-4, you can just blast off with 8-9, like stuff like that was very, like it just didn't seem possible to me. Like I thought like when you bluff, you're supposed to bluff with hands that have equity, and if you don't have equity, you don't bluff unless you see betting the flop, basically. And that's how most people played.
And did you then, for example, did you just look at the solver or saw someone do it and be like, I guess I should do it as well? Or did you first need to get a better understanding? Were you like quick in understanding the why so you could execute? Or was it more like, okay, I'll copy paste this because OTB did it as well? Or,
Well, I mean, the case of like someone like Ike, I've known him forever, were good friends. So there were the people like that I'm like, oh, I can just ask them questions and they can make sure I'm not going in the wrong direction. So I think like with someone like even OTB, it's like, well, I know he's excellent. It's not like the MTT thing where you look at the biggest winner at the end of the year and like half the people will say he's a fish and half the people will say he's some secret exploitive genius, like with any of those MTT, with any of the cash guys, you're like, if they're doing something, they have a reason for it, they're on the right track. It's probably something you should give credence to. Or if there's something that like, I don't know how mean I want to get about saying specific names at this point, but you can fill in the blank of who you might think I'm thinking about,
I actually, your kind of involvement in strategy with the solvers actually was quite similar to mine, where I had kind of the solver, but it was more like people around me in cash games started to use all these different sides and stuff. Yeah. And I was more kind of reflecting on, hey, why this actually puts me in a difficult situation. So I kind of looked at the situation more from understanding it. And then I would look it up in the solver and be like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. And then I didn't have to look at it much, but I just felt like what this would do to me or to my opponent. So I straight away kind of understood it. And then I kind of saw that these other guys, they learned the trick. They were trying to copy the solver, and then they started applying it to other spots. And I was like, wait, but in this spot, it makes no sense. So it seemed like, they all were trying to copy solvers and throwing solver tricks at me. And they put me in a situation where I was like, oh, this is interesting. Actually, I can use this. I understood it quite quickly. And I felt like they were just doing tricks and then they were misapplying it in other spots. So throughout my career as well, like I started using way more solvers actually when I started to coach, because I felt like, I kind of had to back up with what I was saying.
Yeah. No, that's a big one for like, even for like when I'm coaching, even for like pre-flop stuff, I'm just like, look, I need you to know I'm not bullshitting here. Like there's still that like element of like, hey, if you're paying me money, I'll show you the work,
Yeah, it's a little, just a little like you see. I'm not just talking things. This is software approved. Has there ever been a mistake you were hesitant to share? And if so, what was the reason or emotion for that hesitation? Or you feel like right now you have no problem sharing anything? Or has there been a time where you thought about one and you were like a little bit hesitant to maybe say this?
The only ones I've maybe kind of like held back a little on, or if there were specific exploits was a specific player. And even then, I try to kind of put it in a way where if you read through the lines, you can kind of see it. Like I might put in like a paragraph at the end where I'm like, if I think he was over bluffing, I should have probably called, and that means like, this guy's a maniac. How did I fold? Whatever, something like that. But I've never been that sort of like confidential with that sort of stuff, because I've played, just on stream, I've played thousands of hands, and now like there just aren't that many kind of like secrets. Like back in the day, I get the idea of being a little more cagey about that stuff because people didn't know. But like, last week Sauce did Ben Salsky did an AMA on Run It Once, and somebody asked him, like, do you think because he is basically done with poker. He's just doing investing and raising his family and stuff. I see him occasionally in Toronto. He was like, I basically think that if I like took right now like 5 years off poker and came back and played like a solved game, like No Limit Cash, that it would take me a little bit to get up to speed, but like I would probably be able to play with the best players. Like, because he just thinks, because since the game is solved, like there's a limit to the evolution in the game that can happen. And I kind of feel the same way with my like content, where like any of the things I'm posting, people can look up pretty easily if they want. Again, except for maybe specific exploits or specific reads or stuff like that. So I've always kind of had the attitude that like, especially now, there just aren't too many secrets out there, I feel.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, if you don't share them, it's a matter of time before someone else shares them. That's usually how I thought about coaching and stuff. Like, listen, I'm not gonna. That cannot be my only reason. I like to help people. I like to work with other people. If they don't learn it from me, they're gonna learn it from someone else. So, sure, I might have like some very specific approach to certain situations that I would think that I'm more unique in. But everyone has like, But I definitely think, like you said, it's a lot more things are nowadays common knowledge. And I think poker nowadays is a bit less about knowledge, but it's became way more about performance, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. Like, especially, I think one of the things that happens at kind of like Tritons or these live stops, so people who are not prepared to play, like they think they can do it, and like, okay, you need to play 15 days in a row and play well and keep playing well when you're losing and like reg on time and do all these things, and that becomes the hard part. You know, like I'm consistently impressed by kind of the guys, you know, like Lena or some of the online MT2 legs who just play 8 hours a day every day for like a decade. It's crazy. Like the stamina to do that. And even if like I'm not saying this in some sort of like ego way. Like I think because of the way we approach poker, I'm a little more studied than him. I've played more versus like other top players than him. So like if I had to like, you know, whatever, crossbook myself with Lena and like a super high roller, I would take myself. If I had to like make a bet at the beginning of the year, like who would have a higher EV in terms of like money earned, it's him. No question. He's like, I play poker like 100 days a year and he plays poker like 300 days a year, you know, like it's no contest. And it's a really hard skill to have, and it's really impressive. And like executing is already hard enough, but executing over like, you know, like a year or years is just a really hard skill to have.
Yeah, and it's something that with more and more knowledge out there, is a skill that needs to be worked on more. If I speak for myself as well, usually when I make a mistake, I already can sort of brain solve afterwards kind of what I did wrong and if it was a mistake. Nowadays, it doesn't happen that often anymore that I completely blunder and I didn't know. Like usually a mistake is just a lacking concentration or like some mental game or a performance issue or I'm tired, whatever. But knowledge, less of the problem than, for example, in the past, right? Where basically all the mistakes were knowledge.
Yeah, for sure.
Adam, this is probably a good time for you to hop in as your Mr. Peak Performance. Do you agree with this statement, and what can players do to kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's interesting hearing both you reflect, because obviously you're towards the end or a long way into your career. So for you your knowledge is really high. You've studied more spots, if not all spots, for a long period of time. So now for you, it's execution is the kind of main variable. Other players early in their careers, first 1 to 3 years, all their errors are going to be knowledge-based mistakes, just being in spots they don't know. So I think it's a natural evolution as you acquire more knowledge, you understand the heuristics, the mechanics behind strategy at a higher level. More of your mistakes are going to be execution-based. So yeah, I think it's good to someone listening who's like, I'm making all my mistakes based on not knowing what to do in spots. It's probably early in their career, there's still work to do there. So I think they go hand in hand. And as you get better, you're going to lean more towards execution-based mistakes, which is normal. It was interesting, Sam, as you mentioned at the start, that you mentioned like financial stress of playing is one of the challenges of being a poker player and making decisions for money. I picture myself like early days, like just thinking of the cost of everything. Every decision has a cost of losing, and it like kind of weighing heavily on me, especially when I was in Thailand with some friends trying to pay the bills. And then as that kind of financial pressure kind of eased a little bit and I felt like I'd solved that problem, the next one was the ego and kind of mistakes being tied to my identity. So for you, you've mentioned a lot like kind of being able to look at mistakes from a vantage point, learn from them. How do you advise someone who maybe deals with the ego side of that? And by that, I mean someone who, when they make a mistake, they feel like I'm not good enough. This mistake represents a failure of myself. I suck at poker. I need to get better. Did you have any struggles with that department?
Now, I think my ego thing tended to be more like arrogance, overconfidence. Like, I'm better than this guy. Why shouldn't I be winning? And that's an easier thing, I think, to deal with because you know, self-doubt would creep in. Because the reality is you're going to go through losing streaks and you're going to have self-doubt. That's how it goes, especially in tournaments. And I think for me, the way that like that sort of like decreased a little was just winning, which is not like a good prescription to anybody. It's like, hey, go on a heater, build some confidence up that way. And then of course you need to deal with the other way, especially in tournaments, because sometimes when you win a tournament, you just like, oh yeah, I won 4 flips in a row. you don't even think of it. It feels so natural because, like, you've been all in with ace jack versus pocket eights or whatever a million times in your life, and you know what it's like to win. And winning it 3 or 4 times in a row doesn't seem that crazy a thing. I think in terms of ego, like the self-doubt and beating yourself up, I do think one thing that's always helpful is just trying to, like, move down in stakes, playing games you can win. I do think there was, like, a psychological benefit to just, like, booking. If you're a cash player, I really do think there was, like, a psychological benefit to booking wins. So, like, look, the game's great. You're getting a little tired. Like, just book the win. You'll wake up feeling good in the morning. Like I talked with the stress of being on, like, these trips. And one of the hard things is, like, yeah, you just lose 100K in a day or more. And then, like, you just have to play the next day. Yeah, like, I just think generally be patient. Things will take longer than you think. If that means moving down in stakes, if that means booking wins, if that means doing something you're comfortable with, that's fine. Because there will always be, like, a time to take a shot or go up stakes or do something you're uncomfortable with. But if you're not feeling prepared, then, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an important point as well, because I think it's good to have long-term goals, to be pushing for achieving those over your career, but at the same time realize in the short term, sometimes you just need to take a step back to regroup, to recharge, book those wins, get your mind in a good place. I think this is where sometimes we think we're robots, we can just push through everything, and sometimes we need to regroup. We need to realize, okay, actually, right now is a good time just to get my confidence back. And yeah, it's interesting you mentioned, like, the kind of solution to getting confidence is to bank some wins and get some big scores. And it's interesting how much players link their confidence to results. And then you get some freaky people who don't need results. They're either delusional or they're just massively confident. But those guys are, like, quite rare. Most of us need some validation. I class results like the solver approval. It's like, give me the solver approval. Yes, doing well. And at some level, we all need that. Obviously, we're in a results-based business. If you're not getting results for years and years and years, there starts to be a question mark in yourself and also people around you. So I think it's a good thing to know to bank some wins, to go a bit low if you need to, something to rebuild your confidence. And we're all battling with that kind of dilemma of what I need to do to be more confident going forward. So yeah, that's a good reminder to anyone who's got big dreams, big hopes, who might be pushes too far in the short term.
Coin Poker is one of the fastest growing poker rooms out there, and from what I've seen and experienced, it feels generally built with players in mind. They got fast payment processing, a global player pool, and a clear focus on sustainability and community-driven development. They have been very innovative, rolling out things like the Cash Game World Championship and the recent edition of 7-2 Bounty Tables, which says a lot about the direction they're going. This is currently one of the sites I like to go and play, but hey, that's just my take. I'm sharing this for informational purposes only. If you want to take a look into it further, there are more details in the description down below.
So I wanted to steer the conversation a little bit towards your backstory and really get us to understand you as a person, how you grew up, and some of the traits you've been developing. So you grew up with 2 brothers. How did that impact your competitive drive growing up, and how did that impact your decision going to poker?
Competitively, like Max is 3 years older than us. Luke and I are twins, and, like, we had a very sort of normal younger brother, older brother dynamic. That is, like, we just looked up to him, and, like, if he did something, we copied it and all that. And, we never really competed with Max, obviously, because, he was older than us and like, ahead of the curve with us and whatever. But when he got into poker, it just felt like something that I could naturally get good at. I think I grew up in, like, there's a concept of poker in, like, pop culture. Especially it's male coded in terms of, like, hey, like, men playing poker, and if you can win in the poker game amongst your friends, you're, like, the smartest, and you're, like, outwitting and outsmarting all your friends, and you're out gambling them, and you're, like, a smart guy and a savvy guy. So because of that, I was always drawn to it. And then when I saw that, like, hey, like, all these, Max, and he was good friends with Peter Jedin, and they had won a bunch of money, and, like, I say a bunch of money, but, like, it might have been a thing where, like, when they started off, they'd made, like, 20 grand or 30 grand, which when I was 15, the idea that, like, Peter Jedin made 20 grand in a $200 online poker tournament was like, holy, that's fucking crazy. And Peter knew, like, Robil and Galfond and all those guys, and, like, I went the first summer I was in, like, the original, like, I was 16, I just went to visit, and like I couldn't gamble, but I went to like the original Chip at Olu house. So I met all those guys, and I kind of saw what it was like. And yeah, that's kind of how I got my started to poker, just the fact that, you know, my whole life I was lucky to be connected to people who could give me like good advice. You know, you talked about kind of like the idea of confidence in poker. Well, like the reality is most people who play poker, most people who gamble lose money. You know, like 99, whatever the number is, some huge percent. So to get the guidance of like, you know, the fact that I was on 2+2 and the fact that I knew these guys who were successful and making a lot of money online and all that sort of stuff, that was huge. Like those worlds where I could have, you know, met somebody else who was like, you know, reading worst poker strategy and giving me bad advice and whatever. And like, yeah, there were times where maybe I didn't get like the best advice from them, but like all in all, I got great advice and like great mentorship, and it really helped me because, yeah, like it's so, I don't know, it would have been so easy to fall. If you know nothing about poker, like it's pretty easy for somebody to like kind of like, not like con you, but for somebody to convince themselves they know a lot and be like, oh, this is how you should be playing. These are the games you should be playing. This is what you should be doing. So, yeah, no, I was very lucky in that sense. And then I was also lucky that I started playing underage where like money didn't matter. Like I could just play money as a video game basically. And then by the time I was 18, I'd made like 10K or something. And then I'm like, okay, well, like I have 10K US dollars in Canada. I'm going to university. I can play like whatever I was playing, like $50 and $100 sitting goes, and you know, like I can go. That was good. It like set me up very well.
Yeah, as a 16-year-old, you're exposed to the world of professional poker, and I can imagine for you at that stage, it must have been a bit tempting just to go all in on poker. I picture myself at 16 or 18, and if I was in that environment, I'd be like, forget the studies, forget university, I'm a poker player now. But for you, you decided to study. You went to university, did finances and economics. What made you decide to pair studying with poker at that phase?
I sort of felt that, hey, like so long, like even for like my family, that they were just like, hey, if you don't drop out of school, we don't really care. You know, if you don't, like Max had done well, I had made money. If I dropped out of school, there might have been a conversation about it. If I had like, you know, started being like, hey, I need 5K, I need 10K, you know, then there might have been some discussions about it. But they just saw I never deposited. I withdrew money to my bank account, completed school, so that was fine. Now, like in hindsight, you know, yeah, like I probably should have just been like, you know, like I'm not using my degree for anything. Like I probably should have just been dropped out and played a bunch. I say this jokingly, like I never would like playing this game because like everything changes in your life then. But no, I mean in hindsight I didn't really give much thought to dropping out because I kind of felt like, hey, so long as mom and dad are happy, so long as you have a backup plan, you know, you're fine.
You not only went to university, you finished university. So for
Yes.
you, I'm guessing like the pull to maybe play more poker. I know many players who've gone to poker like in that kind of early teen years. Most of them struggled to finish studies. It's quite a challenge. First of all, like how was that in terms of playing poker alongside studies? And then was there anything you were learning from finances, economics that was helping you to be a better poker player? Especially early days, was there any kind of overlap between skills you were learning at university there?
The way like the university worked is a lot of like the courses I was taking my first couple of years were just pretty, you know, basic introduction, blah, blah, blah stuff. I don't know like how much like learning like, you know, about like Black-Scholes, but even Black-Scholes, which is like an option pricing thing, I learned it like my last year in university. Yeah, like I'm not sure how much like learning, you know, like Calc 101 stuff like helped with my poker game, but I think it helped in terms of keeping me sort of like mentally flexible and agile and learning different things. I think it helped, at least at some point, I got to the point where I taking some university level courses in like game theory and stuff, that I was able to sort of conceptualize game theory problems that, you know, weren't related to poker that then I could apply to poker. And I think it also helped me with kind of like, you know, vocabulary, language, stuff like that, that when somebody would casually say like, oh, this is a Nash equilibrium, I would know what that means beyond like looking up the answer on Wikipedia or whatever.
Yeah, I think also university, like your studies, kind of builds resilience to stick at something. If you look at like the value of a degree in the current world, it's like, why would I employ someone with a degree compared to someone who hasn't got a degree? And kind of the real strongest reason is, are they able to stick at that thing for 3, 4, 5 years? So I think it tells us a lot about yourself that you're alongside poker, because I can imagine myself, I did university as well. I had no distractions. If I had a distraction alongside it, I think I would have crashed and burned. So it's quite remarkable that you were able to keep both things going at a good level and get through them.
I graduated in 5 years, so that was kind of my like. I guess I had like a poker course every semester, you know.
Yeah, that's very understandable and very acceptable. So for you, when you finished your studies, what were you thinking that part of your life? Were you thinking still you were going to a proper career, or were you just waiting to finish so you could go more full time with poker?
Well, what happened was I'm Canadian. I went to university in Canada at McGill, which is in Montreal. I was training from Montreal to Toronto, and I was thinking like, okay, I have friends in Vegas, I have friends in New York. Maybe I'll go to the States. And like literally in my head, this is how I remember it. I'm probably making it up here, but like in my head, it was like I was on the train and like the news of Black Friday happened. Like it's a movie where there's like a TV or something. But yeah, and then I'm like, well, now I can't go to the States because you can't play online poker in the States. So then I just moved in with like a friend of mine, like non-poker friend. He had a spare bedroom in Toronto. And I was like, well, I'll just give this poker thing a shot. At the time, I was I hadn't been, I don't know if I was on a, I know at that point I had to have been backed. Yeah, I was backed for MTTs at that point. And I was in makeup and I maybe had like 25K to my name or something like that, which, could have just graduated university, totally fine. And that September or October, I chopped the Sunday Million with Nick Petrangelo, which is like crazy that like we're still around, both of us. I say chopped, no. We got in a chip lead pot like six-handed, getting in like some ICM war with each other, and then he busted everyone else at the final table, and then we played 2 hands heads up, and he beat me heads up. And then I had like a DFS score over December that year. I think I might have had a W Coop score as well. So I kind of pretty quickly went from like 20K to, I don't know, like 200K, we'll call it. And then it was like, oh, now if I play satellites into EPTs online and at that point there was enough volume where like that's how you played EPTs. You played $500 tournaments, still you won a package, even if you had a small bankroll. And then I could start traveling where like, if you have 20K to your name and you travel to 3 EPTs, well, like airfare and like whatever, suddenly that's like half your net worth or something. So now I had enough money that I could cover all that stuff. I don't know, like I think about what would have happened if I just like, had like a horrible deal and just ran poorly. Like if I would have started like seeing what I could do in terms of getting a job or whatever, but I just happened to run very good at that like period of time and set me up to keep doing it.
At this stage, were you seeing yourself as a future live player, or were you just enjoying the live online grind as well? How were you kind of thinking through your goals in poker early days?
I think at the time I didn't feel as big a disconnect between like live and online, because online I felt was much more like robust. You didn't need to travel to play certain places online. You could just play. I could just play on all the sites. Because it was after the UIG, so there couldn't have been full tilt. But, there was Poker Stars and there was, there were other sites and like On Game and all those other sites. And you could just play those. And then the live poker schedule was just a lot smaller, especially as a Canadian. I don't play in the States because there's withholding tax. So the only tournaments I could play were tournaments in, even at the time, Macau hadn't really been built up. There weren't really live tournaments in Asia. So it was just like, well, I need to play online and then I'll play EPTs. And that was kind of the only live poker I could play. EPTs and Aussie Millions was basically it.
Were there any challenges you ran into early days? Did you go on any big downswings or have any periods where results weren't coming in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it just has to happen with tournaments in those days. But again, I was backed at that point too. So like the feeling, look, being stuck a lot in makeup is a really bad feeling, but like losing a lot of your own money is a worse feeling. um, like, no, I really don't want to give it like short shrift, because like there is this feeling that you're stuck in makeup where you feel bad for the investors. You're like, I'm playing these tournaments, and if I like win, you know, I'm playing an online session where if I like win like the 3 biggest tournaments of the day why would I grind on a Tuesday when I can't even clear makeup? You know, that sort of like kind of poisonous, toxic mindset. And I didn't know there were periods of time where I was like, it's been, you know, X amount of time since I've been in the black and been able to actually get more money. But I can't think of anything like specific. It's just like I know like the feeling of that where it just sucks. It's not fun.
Well, you've went on to play higher and higher. You've been a regular at the Triton stops. For you, did you always have the vision of playing as high as you could, or was that confidence something that developed as you got more and more success?
Well, it also, if we go back to the ego thing, where I looked around at high rollers, and I like looked at the fields, and I'd like see certain people where I'm like, okay, like Dan Smith, he's better than me. Steve O'Dwyer, he's better than me. Igor, he's better than me. And then I would look at some of the other people and be like, I'm better than him. I'm better than him. I'm better than him. I should be playing these things. And then I kind of had like, I realized that, especially at the time, to get the reputation of being a high roller player, you just kind of needed to play in high rollers for like 6 months. Like it wasn't like, it was sort of like, oh, he's a high roller player. He plays 100Ks. It's like, why? It's like, because he's played 5 straight 100Ks. You know, there's 500Ks in a year, and he played all 5 of them. So I made a real like concerted effort to sell for those things. And I remember, like, I'm sure I have them like somewhere kicking around on an old computer, old Google Drive folder, something like that. But yeah, there were like, you know, 100Ks where I sold to like, you know, like 18 different individuals or whatever, like, you know, like 3% at a time, or, you know, I really like did that like work. That was also before the action buying markets were so developed, and it really was a game. You just post in a group chat and get a bunch of people to message you saying they'll buy like 1 to 3%. And then the first 100K I played at the PCA, I cashed. I think I cashed the 100K in Australia too. That was like right after. So I was like, hey, I cashed 200Ks in a short period of time. I didn't do anything so like bad one way or another, which would indicate something, you know, which will people wanted to stop buying my action or like give me a talking to or whatever. And yeah, it was just kind of, again, in terms of ways I got lucky, that was like smooth sailing for me. I don't know what would have happened. Even on like a cards level, I think in the PCA 100K I cashed, I ran a big bluff for Steve O'Dwyer. And like if he called me, maybe like the narrative around me is like, oh, Sam wasn't ready to play 100K. Steve like made this big call. You know, like that sort of stuff, you know, maybe my confidence would go down. Maybe I didn't believe I could cash the tournaments, you know, any of that stuff. So I think I was correct in assessing my like skill at the time. I was winning in the tournaments. I was like a good buy, but yeah, it would have been interesting to see if different things could have shaken out.
Yeah, it shows how fragile the kind of narrative is, and if you can replay a few events, that could maybe change the trajectory. We wouldn't know how that would unfold. Hopefully, as you mentioned, you were putting yourself in a good spot with an edge, and it would have been a different path, maybe to a similar destination. So you feel like as your story's unfolding, we're seeing a lot of success, a lot of kind of progression. In 2019, I think you came 5th in the main event at the Triton London. But then after that, 2020, things took a bit of a downturn for you in particular, especially being a live player, enjoying all the Triton live stops, and now you're in COVID and lockdown, playing online. I know for you in particular, that was a tough period. So you can take us back to 2020 and how you were kind of dealing with poker and what some of the challenges you faced there.
Yeah, so 2020 started off like excellent for me. I went to Sochi, Aussie Millions, and then Sochi, where I cashed a bunch of tournaments. And then I remember the first days in lockdown, I like won like 2 10Ks. Party Poker had this big tournament, like this 5K big game every Sunday. They got 200 entries, and I won it. I think I won it twice. And I went on this like very quick, very fast upswing. Then, of course, as is bound to happen, there's going to be a downswing. And I remember just talking to Mike Watson about it, and he said it was kind of like trying to repair a plane as you're flying it, where there was so much action every day, and I was like, well, I need to play. The tournaments are good. I got to play. And I probably just, I was not taking like huge pieces of myself. I was swapping in a lot of the tournaments. But the reality is you're playing like these online 10Ks with 70 people and maybe like, I don't know, maybe like 20, say like 20 regs who you think are like not up to snuff. But realistically, there's only like 3 or 4 like spots in the tournament. And like, so you maybe talk about these 10Ks where you maybe have like a 3% edge. Maybe that's even ignoring like, maybe it's like 5%, but then there's cheating and like all sorts of other stuff going on. I still like feel in my heart that these tournaments I was winning in, but like, yeah, going on a 80 buy-in downswing in 5Ks or 10Ks like this is pretty normal. And I think what happened is I had this instinct in my head, well, like even online, it's like, okay, well, at the scoop, if there's one period of time and like, yeah, over the course of 3 weeks, they'll have like 6 5Ks and 6 10Ks, And then it went to being like those 10K re-entries every single day for 6 months. And I don't think I properly adjusted to the fact like how risky that was, how big the swings I could get were. The fact that I got off to such a big heater to start, I think really played a role in that. I probably should have recognized actually the money a little more. I feel like in live poker, you're like, well, I bust a tournament. I get up. I go. I like click a button. Where like online, you bust and you just like click, 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 like re-enter. And yeah, then you start getting to like life EV questions kind of like, okay, so you get to play 1,000 10Ks where you're making like 3%. So whatever that works out to, that $3 million in EV. Yeah, it's got to be. Yeah, $3 million EV. But there exists like a large chance you lose like $1 million. And it's like, oh, I have a friend who went to Vegas and he kind of had brought $200 with him. And he goes to a $25 blackjack table and he just like a shoe loses all $200 bet, like, right? And like to him, I remember seeing the look on his face, which was just kind of like, yeah, I came here with the plan of losing $200, but not this quickly, Like I was prepared to lose it over the course of the weekend. I have a couple fun nights, I get some free drinks, whatever. And I feel that's kind of how like the COVID games ended up working for me, where I ran really good at the start, and then I did not properly kind of like adjust how much I should be firing or how like cautious my registration strategy should be or things like that, to the way that I really opened myself up to go for like a downswing that I was larger than I was like prepared to go on. Especially because if you want to talk about even like the selling action thing, if I said, hey, I'm on a downswing, I'm not in a good like mind space, so instead of like 10Ks, I'm going to sell half my action in them and I'll sell them as 5Ks. Live, that's like a much easier thing to do, where you're like, okay, I'm one tabling before each tournament. I can like kind of make some sort of judgment about what I'm supposed to do. Online, you bust a tournament and you have 6 other tables registering. At the time, GG and all these other sites had, and like Stars had like loopholes where you could get good seats in tournaments if you timed your late reg correctly. So you see a good seat open up and you're just like, bam, click. And you're like, yes, I got the button with 10 big blinds. I'm a fucking genius. And it's just like, okay, like, so now what? Instead of winning at like 1.8%, you're winning at 1.9%. Like, great, you're risking 10K to win 190. Now you're winning $190 instead of $180 on your 10K investment, where 85% of the time you're going to end up losing money. Like, did that really like the thing you should be celebrating? And the other thing is that what I'm describing happened with a lot of like the VIPs during COVID. I feel like as well, where like at the beginning, like that was the other way the games got worse. First of all, in like March, April, May, a lot more people were locked down, obviously, so a lot more people were playing. But yeah, there were these people who had like would go to an EPT, and they might play nothing bigger than a 10K. An EPT and a disastrous trip for them would be them losing like 100K. And then online, they would go, oh, there are 3 10Ks running. I play 10Ks live. I'll go play the 3 online 10Ks. And then they'd lose 500K in a week. And then they'd start playing, and you could tell they're like, oh, this is not what I signed up for, And I feel, except the people who ran good and were winning, I think everyone kind of had that sensation at some point. And like, ideally, you scale back and figure it out. But yeah, as I said, it really was like, fixing the plane while you're flying it.
Yeah, this sounds like a really interesting period of your career. And it got me thinking there as you were talking, how our tolerance to risk is on a time spectrum as well. We can handle some amount of risk, but not all at once. I think that's a good thing that we often don't notify. And obviously with your normal grinds, you kind of got used to what risk you were exposed to. But in this new environment, there's just more risk, more opportunities, and it's very easy to get sucked into that. So I'm guessing, like, obviously this was very unique for COVID, but I'm sure there's other periods of your career as well where opportunities become available, and your ability to understand how much risk you can take on for a period of time is a really, really important skill. So for you, what were some lessons you learned for this period about risk, about how much you can tolerate, and how to make better decisions around opportunities going forward?
Yeah, I think one of the things you need to consider is, even if you don't have sort of like, even for me, like, okay, so I have some coaching income, I have passive income from like the stock market, I have this. So if I didn't play any poker, my bankroll would increase. So that's to some degree built into how much risk you're taking over a spectrum of time, because you're to some degree psychologically projecting like, oh, I will make some passive income. I will make some whatever investment income. I will make some like employment income. And that's kind of like built into it. Well, yeah, if you do it all at once, then you don't have any of that sort of backstop. And then the other like risk, again, that I sort of touched on was I probably underestimated how big a buffer I needed to account for online cheating, which is, maybe I'm being like delusional here, but like I think all the games I was playing, there were people who were cheating, basically. Well, cheating could be like RTA, cheating could be, full on like collusion soft play, and cheating could be like mass data stuff. I don't really know, but with like Ali and Jake, the most obvious, they were kind of doing everything, is my understanding. And I don't think I properly gauged how much decreasing my win rate made the error bars of what I was doing, how much riskier it was basically. I also think there was a general, like kind of like mass, whatever you want to call it, but like everyone was a little crazy during COVID. Like, I don't even want to get into like if it's like what side of it you were, but like people I feel were very on edge. Some people were very afraid and locked down. Some people needed things like exercise and going outside and were going crazy because they didn't have that. Some people were going crazy because they didn't have enough social connection. So then I think the idea, like, this is a once in a lifetime gambling opportunity, and I need to structure how I'm gambling as smartly as possible when you're in this kind of like totally new world. And I wasn't able to do it. Now, again, if I ran good, then the story would be, oh, I fired big during COVID and I won $3 million, and then I never looked back. Not like I'm currently eating like Mr. Noodles every day for dinner because I went pasta or whatever either. I'm doing fine. But it was a really tough situation to figure out, okay, how much should I be gambling in this totally unique situation? And I think it also tied into the psychology at the time, which I think everyone's attitude was like, well, like, this will be over in a week. This will be over in 2 weeks, in a month, So they're like, well, like, sure, I'm firing a little big now, but I'll be playing live poker July 2020, And then I think my return to live poker was November 2021. I played the World Series main event when they did the winter main event, and that was the first live poker I played in between Sochi and March of 2020 and November, yeah. So it was, and then the first time I played outside of the U.S. was Cyprus in 2022, I guess. Yeah, I didn't quite account for the whole new world we were in.
Yeah, so this was one of those situations where you didn't maybe calibrate the risk as well as you normally do. However, you've had a 20-year career, being around the high-stakes environments. You've made a lot of good decisions around risk, evidently, to survive this long. So I'm wondering, like, for you, like, what are some of the main things when you're thinking about taking on a new risk, whether it's a higher game, some good opportunities? I think a lot of poker players struggle with this because the main opportunities are, one, playing higher, two, investment opportunities or things that pop up in their world. And I think a lot of players kind of can get caught up in the kind of overconfidence phase when things are going well, extend themselves too thin, and then all of a sudden they get knocked back to reality to where they started, and they feel frustrated that they didn't capitalize on the upswing. I think it comes down to understanding risk for yourself and how you can tolerate risk, but also the decisions you make when more opportunities become available. I know in your world there's probably an exponential amount of opportunities and games you can play, things you can do. So how do you think about taking risks? Because you mentioned there, like, now you can see clearly that those kind of small 0.1% or 1% edges in lower percentage fields aren't generally something you're going to chase. How do you make good decisions around how much risk to expose yourself to in your current world?
I've always been pretty nitty in terms of like bankroll stuff. I think it's just kind of my temperament. I think the problem with that is you look around, like if I look around at poker and I kind of look at the people who have made the most money, you know, including like people who've made money in crypto and like, you know, sports and yada, yada, yada. And they tend to be people who have this ability to just kind of like go life all in. Even like if I had like whatever, and I might get the years wrong here, but like if I had in like 2009 put like, you know, 10K in like Bitcoin or whatever, I don't think I would, like, just because of my temperament and who I am, I would have never have let it get to like 100 million. Because if I had like 10 million, I would have had to have like drawn down. I couldn't have like dealt with the idea of having that. And like, so I think the good overall, like, good thing about being nitty is you get to stay in action and stay in the game. And like, hardest way to make money is if you don't have a bankroll, if you don't have capital, if you can't do that. The flip side of that is when you look at sort, like, you know, I know people who were in Macau early on when the game started and they just ran bad and lost money, right? And that's like, I think about like, that's like, I think a pretty good hypothetical of like, okay, you're in Macau in 2012, again, if I get the years wrong, I'm sorry. And you have 100K to your name. What do you do? Like how much are you willing to like risk that you go broke? Right now, if I knew like what I knew now, I would say you should be willing to lose it all because the games are great. And like, from my understanding, most of the people who need to get money out of Macau use crypto to get it out. So then they end up making a bunch of money that way. So I've kind of gone off target here. I guess what I'm saying is I've always been quite nitty, and I think that's overall served me well because from like a life EV perspective, like I'm not sure how much better my life would be if I had like $100 million. Now, I don't know, maybe somebody, if anyone's watching this and wants to like give me, you know, whatever, like 90 something million, and then I'll report back on how nice it feels. No, but I think being nitty and making sure I could stay in action and be able to make money with the right is my sort of natural inclination. And I think it's like generally the right thing to do, but it's hard when you look around and the people who have made the most money are the people who have taken the biggest risks. And there's a part of you that goes like, am I missing that like gene? Am I missing that quality? Or is it just survivorship bias where I'm just looking at the person who succeeded the most and wishes I were them?
Yeah, exactly that, right? I think this is the challenge we face. At the top of any kind of field, there's survivorship bias, and we're always going to see like the people who take the highest risk are going to somewhat get the top in certain fields, especially poker. But how many people failed? How many people took the exact same approach and are now broke, working a part-time job, hating their life? And it's like, okay, do I want to kind of roll the dice on for everything to kind of go to the top and get there quicker? Or does my temperament fit better to a kind of slow and steady approach? And I think it does come down to temperament. It does come down to risk tolerance. I think age factors in as well. I know myself, like early 20s, like someone goes, I'd bet it all on something. I'd be like, yeah, go on, I'll win it back. I wouldn't have cared as much. I think you have less consequences and you kind of know times in your sight to kind of get it back. But yeah, I feel like the people who take a lot of risk there's definitely a skewed sample in terms of there's so many of them that we just don't hear from. Like, what's the ratio of the guys who took similar risk and are in real bad situations compared to the guys who are very, very wealthy? We can't really work that out. But yeah, I think for you, obviously, longevity's been your key, and you've made good decisions. You've been smart with your bankroll. You haven't taken on too much risk, which has allowed you to navigate so many different changes in the poker world and still be playing at the top.
Yeah.
Are you grinding hard, studying solvers, reviewing hands, but still not getting those results that you know you're capable of? You're putting in the time and effort, but without clear direction, that effort does not pay off. That is why I created the Mechanics League Buster program, which is the exact system I use to make over 7 figures playing online poker, and have since taught to hundreds of students so they could do the same. Through our League Finder stats and pop-ups, you will gain clarity on your biggest leaks and tendencies, insights on how your strategies have been performing in-game, and the impact variance has had on your results. But knowing your stats is only the beginning. In the program, we dig deep into the root causes behind your leaks and tendencies and use a proven 7-step system to fix them for good and gain the skills to improve and continuously evolve as a poker player. You'll study more effectively, overcome leaks and tendencies that felt impossible to break, and rebuild trust and confidence in your game, finally seeing your hard work pay off as you move up the stakes. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start improving with clarity, break through the patterns that have been holding you back, and take your game to the next level, join the Mechanics League Buster program using the link down below. And for the first month of enrollment only, you will get access to weekly group coaching calls with me and get a chance to win a one-on-one coaching session in which I personally review your game. So don't miss out on this limited opportunity. Join the Mechanics League Buster program using the link down below, and looking forward to seeing you guys in there.
All right, I want to segue into a different conversation, and it's about the mindset of a high performer. I saw a clip a few days ago of Novak Djokovic, and it was really interesting. He was saying that basically when he plays, everyone goes, "You look so locked in when you're playing Novak." And he's like, "Yeah, but there's a storm inside of me. There's chaos underneath the surface, and I'm learning to navigate that." And I feel like when we look at high performers, it's very easy to think they've got this kind of stoic, calm nature to them. In reality, a lot of high performers, I feel internally, there's a lot going on. There's almost like this killer instinct, this wanting to win. And I think for you, come from a sports background, from what I've read about you, you resonate with that as well. So for you, when you're playing high stakes, let's say you're playing in tough lineups, in the Tritons, the best players in the world, what's it like trying to navigate that the internal feelings you're having and also the thoughts that go with that? What's your experience in the high stakes environment?
Well, first, I do need to correct you. I played like some level of sports, but never at like a very like competitive level. I don't want anyone getting the idea that I was some sort of like varsity athlete. I think the tricky thing with poker is, like in tennis, I wrote something about this at some point, but in tennis, there's literally the element of like, you want to feed off the crowd. You want to get your adrenaline pumping. It can maybe like help you get to like a higher level. Well, in poker, like part of the game is being calm and stoic. Like it is a competitive disadvantage if you show your emotions. So because of that, I think people assume that a lot of these people, like a lot of the people you play with, like in high rollers, don't have emotions, when it's like, no, they've trained it out of them. And I think especially with kind of like, there's a lot of boredom in poker too. So like if, I don't know how certain people do it. There's people who play with a level of intensity that I don't think I could match. Someone like Fedor, who when he's like locked in and trying his hardest, he's watching everything like a hawk. And for me, there's often all sorts of like things that I'm thinking of, sometimes about poker, sometimes not, sometimes kind of like things I'm paying attention to in regards to like, the table, or like when a table's going to break, or like those sort of like meta tournament things. And yeah, I think that I like the Novak quote, because I think through this assumption when people are intense and appear locked in and focused, that it can't be chaotic. And sometimes it really is about like controlling everything you're feeling and putting it together and like locking in for like especially in poker, sometimes you really do just need to lock in for like 5 seconds, and then you get the eureka moment, and then you figure it out. And no, I don't know. I think every person who's playing like these high rollers is very competitive and wants to win, and are doing things kind of in their own way. And even when you see people who kind of like, Orlai Shemian's a pretty good example of a guy who kind of shows a little more emotion, but is also super, super locked in. And then there's somebody like Ike who never had that kind of like intense demeanor, but it looks, when he's like in the middle of the pot and thinking, it looks like his like, like brain power could like melt like the table or something. So I think everyone had their own way of expressing it. And I think what's tricky about poker is that I think some people, they look for the most obvious sort of physiological signifier that somebody is intense, and then assume if they're not showing that they are, that it means they're not intense. But I think everyone is pretty like locked in and competitive in that way.
Yeah, I think at that level, you've got to find a way to be locked in and to bring your own kind of peak performance to the table. So for you, what does your version of locked in look like? When you're at your best, you're feeling great, you are fully immersed in what you're doing. What does that feel like? And also when you're not in that state, how do you get yourself more locked in?
I've thought about the fact that I feel in my career I've consistently played well on TV tables, and I do think there is kind of like a method acting type thing where like you're on the stage, and when you're on the stage you perform. And I think for me, when I'm at my best is when I can sort of like lock into that mindset, even if I'm not on the TV table. Now, for me, in terms of like distractions, I'm like hopelessly addicted to my phone. But again, at like Tritons, for instance, you have the Triton app, so you can, like, a lot of times I'm just looking at hands played at other tables. So that is information that might come in helpful later in the tournament or later in the trip or 3 weeks from now, when I'm playing another hand with those people. And I think it's a really tough balance. I was at a table with Adrian, Mateos, and Hualabos in Monaco. And Adrian was on his phone. And Adrian obviously has as strong a reputation as anyone for being like, locked in. And Hualabos made a comment about Adrian being on his phone. And Adrian basically was like, but I'm playing every day for 2 weeks. I can't possibly be like this the whole time or I'll burn out. And again, that's where it really becomes challenging. You need to find the ways for yourself. For some people it's like late wedging. For some people it's if you don't get good enough sleep, they're just going to late wedge because they know how important sleep is to them. Like for some people it's exercising. Like I could never do what there are guys who play like hour and a half games of tennis before playing a 10-hour day of poker. If I did that, I would be falling asleep at the table. What I aim for, which again, it's not like a conscious decision so much as it suits my natural skills, is I can show up on time, I can play from the beginning, and I know that my C game, or when I'm not at my best, when I'm at 80%, my floor is still extremely high. And then if I make it to a final table, if I get deeper in the tournament, then the hope is I'll have enough kind of in reserve where I can kick it into high gear. But that's what works for me. The other thing is I talked about Tim Adams about this, but he's like, we've been doing this for long enough that when you need to sleep in and when you need to exercise and when you need to eat a cheeseburger because you bubbled the tournament and whatever the thing is, there is an element where a lot of it is about knowing your body, and it really is on these trips, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and it's about knowing what you can do to make yourself stay sharp and get to the finish line. The caffeine is a classic one where, okay, if I knew it was the last day of a trip and I'm at a big final table, sure, I'll just keep pounding caffeine. Now I know I need to play tomorrow and it's 11 o'clock and I'm tired. What do I need to do, All those little things that just kind of it really is about knowing yourself and sort of trial and error and figuring it out.
Yeah, very interesting that, because you brought us on a journey there in terms of how peak performance is not just like a one-off moment. It's like over a duration of time, especially these kind of live stops, and like the importance of pacing yourself, knowing what works for you, knowing how to recover, and then also like being able to turn it on when you need to. So it sounds like for you, you're happy to maybe cruise a little bit at certain times, but you know when it's big final tables, it's late in tournaments, it's something really important. You can get that locked in mode. So yeah, as you said, it's something that you got to figure out for yourself in terms of what works for you. In terms of like things you've tried, in terms of habits that have stuck with you, it sounds like you've obviously found a lot of things that do work well. What are some of the most important habits you've developed or that you lean on that allow you to show up as your best self?
I mean, number one, like, with a bullet is sleep, obviously, which I think everyone will tell you. But like, I think there are elements of sleep that help, because the more you play, the less amped up you get, the less anxious you get, the more like the quicker you can fall asleep. Like, I've gotten to points on trips where, you know, I might have like a big day and I might be able to go to sleep in like an hour and a half. Or like the first time I ever like bagged a chip lead in a tournament, I probably couldn't sleep for like 5 hours. I'm so like amped up, you know. Now if I like, so I think that's a big, like, sleep is just far and away number one. The other ones I think are like, for me, are big, or like the combination of kind of like caffeine management, food management, bathroom management. Like going to the bathroom in the morning before you play is really important. Making sure you don't overeat, like any of those sorts of things, I find to be very helpful. And then I think the other one is too, like, music, headphones, like being able to use them strategically is nice for me. Where like there are times where I need like just to listen to like loud music and shut everything out. There's times I need to listen to like just like a podcast or something that's just like pleasantly diverting, that sort of like just keeps me from like getting like too bored. There's times where I do need to potentially be at kind of like a social table and get out some antsiness or energy that way. It all depends, but really all just starts from sleep. I mean, it's basic, but it's true.
Yeah, and as I was speaking there, I was seeing a very conscious effort to kind of manage your state and to match the state with what you require to do. So if you want to wind down, you want to obviously lessen the caffeine and to find things that relax you. If you want to ramp yourself up, you'll use music or caffeine in those contexts. And I think it's really important to know, as we're going through life, we're not like a static, I'm feeling great today. We're going to go through ebbs and flows. And it's really important to go, right, for myself, what can I do to get my states increased when I need to be more activated, more switched on? And when I'm too amped up, how do I calm myself down? How do I get the right recovery? Make sure I'm not doing too much. I think finding little tools, little kits you can use. And I think music's an underrated one. For myself, like, I don't use music at the gym unless I've got like a really heavy day. But when I do use music in the gym, I'm like, oh, this feels amazing. I feel like so much more energy, so much more hyped up. So I use it as my kind of get out of jail card on a flat energy gym day or a big lifting day. I think it's really important to go, right, it's the state I'm in. Doesn't need to stick. I can do simple things to change my physiology. Another good one's like cold showers. Like cold showers work almost 100% of the time to increase energy, to wake you up, to make you feel alert. So yeah, I think often we rely on caffeine as the kind of the drug of choice for most of us. But there's other things you can do to alter your state, which I think is important to figure out for yourself. Yeah,
there were times in both Monaco and Montenegro where people were going on like the morning swims in the ocean beforehand, and like, it just makes you feel so good for the rest of the day.
Yeah, so true. Yeah. Rene, for you, what are some of the habits that you've relied on to get yourself either more amped up or relax yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a guy of habit, so I don't skip if I play. So non-negotiable, go outside, get daylight, and get some movement in any way, shape, or form. I actually was playing live a week ago, and I slept in, even though I played a tournament, which is already rare, but the tournament started at 2. I wanted to start at time, but I played cash games until like 6 o'clock in the morning or something. So I was like, okay, sleep is my priority. So I actually slept until like 2, try to get my 8 hours. I kind of melatonined my way into 8 hours. And then when I was like, oh, okay, tournament start, but I don't care. I'm going to go to the pool there, get some sunlight, take a swim. I normally don't swim, but, it's the way that, I can get movement in. So I was just swimming for like, I don't know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, got some sunlight. Like you said, go up, take a cold shower, do a couple of breaths, have like a light meal, and then I started the tournament, I think 2 hours late. But I definitely think that's way better than trying to rush my way there without any habits done prior. So no, like for me, before playing, like you said, cold shower, some sort of breathing, some sort of meditation, kind of non-negotiable. I just notice it enhances my play tremendously. I think you kind of have to see what works for you, and it's exactly like I said. You're trying to get yourself in that right state, and that for me usually always does the trick. Sam, you've been playing poker at the highest level for almost 20 years, quite a long time. Many players fell off as the game has evolved, as you might know, right? You saw them falling left and right over the years, I'm sure. Why didn't you? And what allowed you to reinvent yourself over and over and stay at the top?
Well, I will say again, 20 years ago, I was playing like free roll, so I wasn't really at the top then. But and I'll also say some of the people who were at the top left for greener pastures potentially. So I thought like the game left them by. But I think what happened with me is what I described earlier, that I think the solver era of poker lined up really well with my natural skills. And I was a very good poker player. I was a very successful poker player. And then I think when solver started, it gave me kind of like a roadmap to get good quickly. And yeah, I think a kind of debate you'll see often is people who quit just before the solver era, kind of talking about, is solver poker pure poker, or like, what's real poker, whatever. And I don't like really care to have this debate, except to say, for me, I always found solver poker to be like really quite elegant and beautiful, and like I'm really, I would see these solutions and like these hands the solver would play with these outputs and be like, wow, this is crazy, this is incredible, and I really enjoy that element of poker. Like I know there are people who their favorite poker hand ever would be like some guy called somebody bluffs, and like the Phil Ivey Paul Jackson hand, where like they click 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 click. And like, there's nothing theory about that. It's just like, I think you're bluffing. I think you're bluffing. And if that is to you like the platonic ideal, your favorite like version of poker, like that's fine. Like, poker is a different thing for everyone else. But I really like how elegant solver poker is. I like how when you're studying as like the big blind, you're also playing as the other player, Like in any sim you're looking at, you're both players. And, even now you can tell I'm getting like amped up and enthusiastic about it. Like I really felt it was a great match for my like natural skill set, and it's something that I enjoyed quite a bit. Now, if I were somebody who say in 2010 was like a top heads up boss, where I was just playing like full on like max exploit poker, maybe I would look at solvers and go, this isn't the game I love. But for me, like I really just I like it a lot. Like
What do you think was the skill set that made people successful prior to solvers compared to, for example, you said that my skills are naturally aligned with when solvers came out. There's people that had the opposite, that were maybe successful before the solvers, but then were unsuccessful after the solvers. What do you think was the skill set that they possessed and that became less valuable after the solvers came out?
I have a friend, Sean Lafort, who had a he used to play heads up PLO and No Limit, and what he said was it used to be, and even what's funny is he kind of quit before solvers, so he was talking about like at the time when like the big tools were things kind of like Stocks EV, and he said it used to be that everyone was bad at playing heads up. And now the best players, so the best players were the players who were the best at playing those other bad players. And I do think, though, that's what it was, where it was about, like Phil Galfond played heads up nosebleeds and raised like 35% on the button, like, and he was considered one of the top heads up players at the time. And there was a thread on 2+2 at the time where somebody said, hey, if I min raise the button, I'm risking 1.5 big blinds. And if my opponent is folding, if my opponent is playing like whatever it is, like 30% from the big blind, I'm just auto making money by raising any 2 cards on the button. And it was a giant like debate about whether or not. Now, obviously, now whatever, you play like 90 something, I think. But there was like a big debate about like if you should play like 40% of hands on the button or 95% of hands on the button. So it really was like the best players were players who could find a leak in their opponent's game that was like so big, like the type of leak like defending 35% of hands when you're supposed to be defending 65% of hands. And they would just pound and pound and pound and pound. And that's what made them the best. And then again, they would have their own leaks, but it wouldn't matter because they found like a leak in your game that was so like large that the value they would extract from it would make them be a winner. Like there were people who played heads up and were winning from like over large samples were winning from the big blind, So yeah, I think that was like the key skill was it wasn't about being balanced at all. It was about finding like a giant leak your opponent had, which everyone had, including you. Hope your opponent didn't find your giant leak and just kind of like pound away.
Yeah, that sounds how I made my money pre-solver. Yeah, that sounds very familiar. And also, like your own game didn't really matter because basically I would just adjust all my game to my opponent's game. So yeah, if you would look at my data or something, find a leak. Well, maybe I'm not doing that against you because I have a different plan versus any opponent. But I do understand. I mean, I do think when players kind of say, "Oh, GTO blah is boring," is like you said. I can definitely guarantee it's not boring. It does like the most creative shit. If you're, it kind of depends with the mindset that you look at it, right, and what you're trying to get out of it. That kind of really influences your opinion on it. But I do get what some people say, like, "Oh, now it's all solved." Like there's just some notes where there's less room for creativity, like, oh, I want to do something else. I don't want to just do what the solver does. But I'm like not really incentivized to because, my opponent is playing pretty well. And if I make a deviation, it's less likely to make me money. It's more like to cost me money. So in a way, because people get better, especially with like they play solid defensive strategies, there's just less room, to get funky. Without without basically torching money.
Yeah,
is indeed a little bit sad. But like I said, I think it's mainly because especially if you said this when solvers just came out, there was still so much room, and still today there's room. So I really think it depends on how you look at it and how you use it. Which like solver concepts were the hardest for you to internalize, and on the flip side, which ones do you recall learning that kind of blew your mind? You already kind of said like, oh, wait, we're supposed to barrel without equity as well? Oh, I didn't know that. But were there maybe also like you were generally, like you said, fan of the solver and it seemed easy for you, but I'm sure there was like some adaptation, trial and error going on as well.
I think the hardest kind of adaptation is when things are slightly different. So you think you've internalized something. You think you've like learned like a lesson that applies across all boards or like all boards of this class or all situations. And then you go, oh, not this one. And then you need to like dig into why. And then sometimes the answer is like, sometimes you can do the game where you do like the very specific like side card thing or the very specific kicker thing where you're like, oh, like they bluff with king queen because they want like them to fold this and like they want the queen of clubs because the queen of clubs are this or whatever. But even now, like you think you have like a handle on something and you're just like, oh, I was like just off by so much. Like now I'm at the point where I get more or less the general shape of like, it's like, oh, a paired board will play like this, under the gun versus big blind, or like under the gun versus button will play like this, give or take. But once you start realizing like, oh, this is like, I think the big ones are like in like kind of like narrow range spots, where suddenly you're like, oh yeah, no, you have like 8, you get to the river with like 7 combos, both of you. And like you might think this is a normal hand, but like each individual pip is like this gigantic wedge. And I think that's kind of like the hard part where like as soon as you think you have something like internalized and known and you're like, I'll never make this mistake again. You're like, oh, but what if the board is queen 5-4 instead of queen 5-3? And you're just like, God damn it. In terms of the easy ones, I've like one that I always felt was like very intuitive with the idea of like, hey, why you can bluff on boards with a flush draw, you can bluff hands that have like a flush blocker, and then if you hit, bluff on the river. That's what I think people understood. If you got to the river and happened to have a hand with a flush blocker, you can bluff. But it took people kind of a long time to set it up the other way with like, yeah, why don't you just try barreling this hand that has it? I think that was one of the ones that was kind of shockingly easy to implement. Or like similarly, like, hey, if you have a big draw, but you need to bet fold it, don't bet it. Like stuff like that, which, yeah, like I that was just a pretty easy ones to implement for me.
You already mentioned like small nuances in board changes could completely flip the strategy. Were you also maybe at some point at a certain stage when using the solver overwhelmed? Like, did you kind of fall for the trap that you kind of wanted to solve everything and then it just became too much? And did that? And what did you then learn in terms of, okay, maybe I should use the solver different, maybe zoom out more, look for bigger concepts instead of trying to basically memorize every part of the game tree?
Yeah, it's so overwhelming at first, especially in MTTs. Because in MTTs, you need to know how to play all these different stack sizes and all the different preflop stuff shakes out. I mean, if you want to talk about other things I got wrong was I used to, and a lot of people used to play very linearly with the rejamming ranges. If the small blind limps, you don't shove Jack 10 suited from the big blind. You like check back as like a trap to keep in like Jack 2 off. Because if you raise and get shoved on, you're calling off, but you're getting all inverse like ace 5 off. Like that's kind of a waste of Jack 10 suited, right? But like the idea, like it used to be that if you limp the small blind and somebody raised 9-2 off in the big blind, you just like tag them as a fish, you know? You're like, yeah, like this is crazy. He's raising 9-2 off. So the original question was, oh yeah, but yeah, I mean, like especially before you had these giant databases, because now, you know, with GTO Wiz or whatever, you can even just, I use it often as like a shortcut to run my own like Pio sims. When I'm like, I have the pre-flop ranges, I can look at the GTO Wizard flop sizes that are used, and then I'm going to create my own Pio sim because I want to test something like Goofy. Or you can use the GTO Wizard, like, you know, solve AI tool itself. Was extremely overwhelming. Yeah. And I think that's kind of part of where I'm at now, where it took me however many years of using a solver to be able to like, now I can like look at an output, and if there's a wonky output, I can say, oh, I bet they didn't give the big blind a big enough raise size here or something like that. And that's just like you know, I use the tool analogy, but like it does feel like I'm just kind of like, now I'm at the point where I'm like a mechanic or something, and I'm like, something sounds wrong with the engine, you know? I've just used it so much that I know when things were a little off, but it just took a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, and especially I learned this in a podcast we did with Justin Saliba. I always thought there was pre-solver error, post-solver error, and he said, no, there's pre-solver error, post-solver error, and there's post-public solver error. So he added another error, and especially for people in post-public solver error, they're a bit less like an engineer because they never had to set up their sim like you said, right?
Yeah, exactly. I say that to like anyone I'm like coaching or whatever. I'm like you can use GTO Wizard, but just like for the experience, like try setting up a couple sims yourself because it will help you understand poker a lot better. Like I mean, I remember people used to do ICM calculations by hand. Like not like regularly, but like, you know, like in like a 3-handed sit and go, you could do them by hand. And that's a good example where like if you do one ICM calculation by hand, just of like a 3-handed spot to try to figure out what the values of the 3 stacks are, it will help you understand ICM and understand tournaments. Like it's not a practical skill, but it's a conceptual skill for sure.
And it will also help you calculate kind of in the moment, right? Or like, okay, what are things worth? I feel like in general, just looking stuff up and seeing the solution instead of working your way towards a solution yourself, that's when your brain is learning. The same with like, oh, can I actually bluff catch this spot? Well, let me write out combos. Let me do the math. Oh, in that process,
Yeah, exactly.
you learn. And then the next time you get better at it, and at some point it becomes intuitive, right? And I feel like if you nowadays just look at outputs and you don't do the work before that, you're not really learning anything. Actually, I think a study came out from, I think it was MIT, about ChatGPT, how much, and then they were comparing some groups that had to do homework or presentation or something.
Yeah.
The people who use ChatGPT, they learned nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
Speed reading is another one like that. Well, when like they had apps that like made you speed read because they'd like show the text fast or whatever, and then they would like quiz people who sped read on the content of what they read, and they like performed consistently worse than people who just actually read it. And like one of the kind of things I'm saying, like I keep telling myself, and like whatever, if you need to get like your shoes repaired or something, just like whatever it is, everything takes longer than you think. And then if you can actually learn something from the process and like the time, then that's good. And if you spend the whole time frustrated that it's taking so long or you're not getting there, it's just a waste.
Actually, something that popped up in my mind when you're talking about the jacked and suited hand. I think also the questions that we nowadays ask change. In the past, we were happy that we found a plus EV play, right?
Yes.
That we're at least not making a mistake. And nowadays we're looking at, we're more advanced, right? We have more knowledge, we have more tools. So now we're like, oh yeah, it's plus EV, but it's not the highest EV.
Yes.
Right? Whereas in the past we found out, oh, we can just jam this? Oh, nice. Yes. Is it plus EV? Let's go. You know?
Yes, 100%, yeah.
I'm curious, how is your application of theory and GTO evolved over the years? I'm sure you did not hit the sweet spot there in the first time as well, right? Because I feel like a lot of players, when they first get introduced to the solver, they kind of go too much to one camp and they need some time to recalibrate. How did that process look for you?
Yeah, I know a story of I won't say who, but there was somebody who like early on got access to some sort of like heads up solver, some like early heads up solver, and they like studied it for like a week, and then they're like, all right, I'm just going to like battle guys at like 50, 100, and he just got his ass kicked. You know, like she's just like, yeah, I have the answers. I'll just beat all these people. I think the main thing is, I saw actually Tombos of GTO Wizard had like a Twitter thread about this where he talked about how if you're playing like trading versus the bot, there's all these cheats you can use, right? So you can always take passive, you can always take a passive mix because then the pot swallow and then your EV loss will be swallow, right? So I've always felt like it's important when you're like training with a solver that you do randomize, because you need to try to get like the actual strategies right, because that's ultimately what matters. Your goal is not picking plays that don't lose EV or finding like the highest EV play. It's finding like an overall strategy that's rock solid. If you played heads up and you c-bet 100% of the time, you would be losing almost no EV with the solver, and you would probably be unable to beat any decent human, right? And that to me is kind of like the key. Where at first I was much more set on like I need to find the highest EV play, and then I became much more thought the most important thing was finding like the mix, and now it's becoming like this hybrid thing. Again, I'm going to talk about the Sauce AMA thing, but he had a that also ties into things that Adam said about duration that I thought was interesting. He was mostly talking about playing heads up, but it also applies in, super high rollers when you're playing a small pool of people. Well, if you notice a leak in your opponent, he says you want to think of the max exploit versus them as a function of time. So, if you could steal like a penny from somebody every hand in perpetuity, or steal like a quarter from them in ways that are so obvious that then they'll counter exploit you and adjust, you want to try to steal the penny. I think that's like the really hard part, where you want to play a balanced mix yourself where people can't really exploit you, but you also want to give yourself enough wiggle room where you go, they c-bet too wide, they fall to check raises too much, they, they bluff too much, whatever the exploit you're trying to find is, and you can And that's, I think, kind of like the first step is being like, find a play that doesn't lose EV. The next step is like finding a good mixed strategy. And the third is like finding this hybrid strategy where you can balance theory, balance being exploitive, balance like your actual ranges to the point where you're just not playing like an absolute, lunatic or coward or whatever. And that's the hard part. That's kind of how I view it now, where it's like, how can I do that like third level thing? And honestly, there are tons of spots or tons of players I play against where I go, I don't have a strong opinion about number 3. I don't have a strong opinion about number 1. So I'm just going to go to the highest EV solver play.
Now, you talked already quite a lot about like the evolution of poker and of your strategy, especially with the introduction of solvers. What were like the biggest meta shifts you lived through? The ones that kind of forced you to reinvent your game the most? So, since you've been in poker for quite a long time, I'm sure you've seen many trends come and go. You already talked a little bit about like small 3-bet, small 4-bets in the beginning of the conversation. Any other metas that stand out?
Well, what's funny about the small 3-bets and small 4-bets is I feel they're coming back in tournaments. Because basically what you have with the ICM outputs for, post. If you're like a covered stack, you don't want to call 3-bets out of position because it's just how to win money that way when you need to play like passively and you don't really want to bluff. So then instead of calling 3-bets out of position, you just respond by 4-betting a bunch. So there is a lot of like clicking back. So I think it is funny that what sort of started off as this kind of like cheap exploit of like, I'm just going to 3-bet really small and hope this guy, because I know this guy's going to fold too much, has actually become, they were sort of onto something. It is this kind of theory play. I think what's going on right now is there's a big meta in tournaments that is caused by, and I say this as somebody who does not use this because I don't play much online anymore for a variety of reasons. And I've never used this, so I'm not just saying this as like hey, I'm innocent, I'm not doing this, but like there's a lot of mass data people now. And what you're finding then is these kind of like guys who play in these mass data strategies. Well, basically, it seems like a lot of the database analysis concludes that people overfold a lot. So then, if the flop is whatever, like single raise pop button big blind, and it's like king 7-2, and you're like supposed to check raise 8-9 with a backdoor because, you have a 3 straight, 3 flush, 2 overcards, 2-7, all these properties. And now I find you at the thing where people are pushing the limits of like, well, like when I check raise king 7-2, the c-bet who's never supposed to fold queen jack with a backdoor. So if they do fold a hand like queen jack with a backdoor, well, okay, what if I check raise, what did I say, king 7-2? Like, what if I check raise like 5-3 with a backdoor? It has some backdoor straight draws. It can turn some open-enders. It has 2 low cards. What if I check raise, on king 6-2? What if I check raise like 10-3 with a backdoor? It can turn a gut shot at that. So I feel what you're seeing is some sort of mass data players are developing habits that work well versus the population, but obviously don't work well versus like players who know, okay, when I get check raises at the flop, I need to defend 75% of my range here or 70% of my range. And then you get, I think that's kind of this meta, especially because one of the hardest spots to be in is if you check raise the flop with like a total AO type hand and then you don't improve to anything on the turn. Do you want to keep barreling with total AO? That's a little dicey. If the turn goes check, check, then the river's a blank. Now you're in a pretty tricky spot as well because, well, you over check raising the flop with all this total AO. Now you give up a bunch of that total AO on the turn. Are you now going to be over bluffing the river, or is your plan just I'm going to check raise the flop too much and then I'm going to give up after that? So I think that's kind of the current meta, is that there's a lot of people who are developing these mass data tricks which don't work versus good players, but they work with the population. And that's a very hard thing to stop. Like if you're playing like tournaments where a lot of the players are bad, then you're going to develop these that's the classic thing, right? You play a low stakes game, you develop all these tricks that work in that game, And then you move up to a higher stakes game and everyone's like, oh, we know these tricks. I was doing those tricks 3 years ago in that game you were playing. And that's, I think, the tricky part. Especially, I think sometimes with Tritons too, there are people, and I say this as somebody, I talked about this with my own experience when I started playing Super High Rollers, but there are people who playing Tritons where it is almost like an audition. I want you to see that I can play good poker, that I understand solver poker, that I'll play well, so that you'll keep putting me in these things. And it becomes and then you end up playing with those people and you need to figure it out. Are they the type of person who's going to be, I need to show off every cool trick I learned in the lab so people think I'm good? Or are they the people who go, holy shit, 50K is a lot of money. I don't want to lose this guy's 50K doing something stupid.
That I would definitely fall into the first camp. I can definitely see that, right? You also kind of want to impress, these are guys that I look up to, but in general, that's kind of how I play poker. I'm always looking for spots, to show a sign of brilliance. I don't like the ABC. Cool, I can do the ABC, but what I like is a spot where I can show my brilliance. And if I then miss it, I get so tilted. It's like, oh, I could show some brilliance here. I could show some brilliance here. So I would definitely fall in the first camp. You mentioned an overrated skill, right? Applying mass MDA strategies on a high roller field. What's an underrated skill in modern super high rollers?
I think an underrated skill is knowing how all the Rex play, and I see this a lot. You see this a lot with a lot of the Asian guys playing Tritons are some form of poker pro, and I don't mean this in the sense with Paul Flaw is a poker pro, because and I say this, Paul is probably one of the top 10 all-time money winners playing poker, but what I mean is not every guy at a Triton who is wearing a Balenciaga tracksuit is some Asian billionaire who whatever. A lot of these guys are serious poker players who play a lot, and I think Steve O'Dwyer has always been one of the best at this. Where EPT, you'll just ask him about some random guy who you see around and what's that guy's name? And Steve will be this is his name, this is how he plays, this is whatever. And there's no note taking live. And I think understanding which one of these guys are VIPs who are willing to blast off, which one, the different everyone I think in cash games had the thing where they go, I know how this guy plays, when they play a live cash game. They're everyone kind of gets a sense of how this guy plays. Well, now you're at a point with Triton where you might have 90 to 100 guys who you've never played a hand of online poker with. And the people who are the best at knowing the difference between all the different guys, it's a really valuable skill.
Like yourself, I've been in poker for quite some time. Do you see any advantages of that us, I guess we could call ourselves dinosaurs in poker, have over the younger kids? And on the flip side, do you see any limitations?
The younger kids will always have a hunger that we have lost to some degree. I have a son. I have a wife. I can't just be on a whim being there was a mediocre poker star here. I'm going to be gone for a week and a half, right? I can't play every Sunday, I don't know if you have kids, but I realized once we had a kid, the weekend means my son's in daycare. The weekend means we need to take care of him for the entire weekend. The weekend is the opposite of vacation. It is work. We need to make sure he has things to do. And the younger kids will always have that hunger and that edge. That's just life. They probably have better mental cognition at this point. As you age, it just gets worse and worse. And I think it's the classic thing. Yeah, we have experience. There are things that we have experience and we know how to deal with and all that. And there's just all these even I'm not the biggest live read guy, but I've played enough live poker now where like there's just things where I'm in like a hand and I'm just like, something's wrong. I can't explain it. My intuition knows it, and I go, something's wrong, and I can get away from it. And before, when I first started playing like live, it was only like, like if some guy like did like the thing where like he, like looked down at aces, and I was like, I'd pick up on that sort of stuff. I just more experience, better intuition, and then I'm tired more often, and I have worse mental cognition.
I guess they can get away with managing themselves a little bit worse, right? Like they have more energy, etc. So you have to take care of yourself a little bit better. And like with the experience, you get to know yourself better. I'm sure you've made your fair share of fails in terms of self-management on trips that you learned from over the years. I was wondering, you were talking earlier about the clicking and that, that's coming back. So they were actually onto something, which is actually true with I think a lot of strategies that I also recall when I was experimenting with in the past. Some things, like I said, some things they are gone forever, but some things there was some truth in it, right? Do you recall any like controversial strategies, or you also talked about like a bag of tricks that you experimented with throughout your career? And I'm curious, like, are some of those still present in your game, and which one were short-lived?
I always was kind of big on balance. So like when I had like my bag of tricks, a lot of them were like the bag of tricks versus VIPs and stuff like that. I'm sure everyone go through like little phases, I think. Even with Punt of the Day, there'll just be like times where I'll like look at my hands at the end of the day, and I picked a big C-bet size every time available to me today. And then like some other days I'm like, I did not pick a single big C-bet size today. Now some of that is I do randomize, but some of it is like I know I'm like the way I was just thinking where I was just like, for whatever reason, I wasn't actively being like today's big C-bet day. But there's just something in my brain that like led me towards that on the day, I don't know. Did you have any secret tricks that were like the top tricks?
I actually used to always do the doubling 3-bet. Like someone would open 2.5 and then would always make it 5. That would be my main strategy. And kind of like thinking, okay, I put them with a very wide range, and I put them in a spot that I know better than them. There's still some logic to it. However, with most of your range, getting a fold pre-flop is actually where it's very hard to outperform that. So choosing a strategy that has very little to no fold equity pre-flop, I think is quite suboptimal in hindsight. So that but there's like the kind of the linear 3-betting, especially in cash. That's actually still a thing. Only we use bigger sizings, but that kind of already kind of stopped calling and just 3-betted everything to like the double sizing. That was like something that I've experimented with.
I forget if it was a 50, 100, or 510, but I think one time Sauce was just playing somebody heads up. We'll say it's 50, 100, and he just raised to 201 the first hand and 202 the second hand, 203, and he just kept adding $1 every button he played.
If 2015 Sam would sit down with 2025 Sam at the poker table, what's the first thing old you would notice about how different you think about poker today?
What's funny about this is I have a full Punt of the Day. I've looked at some old run at once videos I've done to look at like old hands. So I actually have like an okay window into what I was thinking. And one of the things I was sort of on the right track about, but just off, was I would vary my C-bet size like most people did, where you'd bet bigger on more dynamic boards. But the thing I got wrong is like if the board was like 9-8-7, that suddenly goes back to being a pretty static board because people can have straights. And that was one where I noticed where like I would just like pull all my bluffs from equity and always bet on the big side. And the other thing I would do is I would C-bet too often, similarly on boards where like if I raised under the gun and you called in the big blind and the flop was whatever, I would just C-bet on it because I'd be like, hey, like Jack 8-6 flush draw, I have a range advantage, I bet. Any single like board like that. So I think like if I were playing myself, I would go, well, this guy's playing way too passive out of position and way too aggressive in position, which is a pretty like good setup to pretty good player to like set up, you know.
When moving your way up the stakes, which jump, you know, looking back, was there any jump in stakes that you've had difficulty with? And what did you have to fix in your game in order to establish yourself at that next level? For example, you already mentioned kind of the passivity out of position.
I think I just got lucky that I started off well in Super High Rollers, because the reality of the jump in stakes and MTTs is not that big, because it's not unusual to see somebody playing a 5K and a $100 like this. The same player in a given year will play a 5K or a 10K in a $100 tournament. Like there aren't 10K no limit players who just dabble in, pull up a table of 200 no limit on the side, right? So yeah, Super High Rollers was the biggest because it was much more of kind of like an iterated game where like you have a small player pool, including the VIPs, and you're just playing with a lot of the same people, and there's just a lot few spots. Even if there was like a reg who I thought was like a bad reg, there was still not a spot compared to like the spot you might see in like a 5K main event or a 10K main event.
How did that change your approach? What kind of adjustments did you make?
I think my instinct was that when I was playing versus like the best players, you needed to find this balance. You need to be willing to fight back those players that are better than you, but you also don't want to like go like headhunting and showing you have like a point to prove or whatever, because people do that, and then you go, this guy never has anything, I'm never going to fall to him ever again. So I think the hard part, especially, the kind of under discussed part that I think about now that I'm talking about is like, I would you were used to playing tournaments without shot clocks. And like the idea of like, not just you needed to bluff some of these guys, but like you needed to bluff somebody and have them stare you down for 6 minutes. Like in a main event, like it felt like a lot, but it was doable. But like, yeah, like you're just playing, and like Antonio Esfandiari is just staring you down for 8 minutes and like pump fake calling and like all this bullshit. That was there were the tactical adjustments, of course, but that was a big one as well, for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. Long-lived shot clocks.
Yes.
So you like, obviously the opposition, you said the opposition gets tougher. What do you notice about like the better players? Like what kind of sets like the regs at Super High Rollers apart from the mid-stakes regs? I
think a couple things, which are especially no limit, when I can like talk to some of the guys, like some of the like best players do a lot of pretty extreme exploiting in a way that I think would be, kind of in line with what you might picture like sort of like a top cash player doing. And you don't necessarily like see it all, because a lot of the times when you see stuff on streams, there are final tables, and final tables are you are doing exploiting, but it needs to be within the construct of that specific final table. And like a lot of Tritons are kind of turbo-ish. Anyway, there isn't that much like exploiting. You could do like 15 big blinds deep. But like I remember there was like a hand. Well, this helped like quite a bit in terms of like conceptualizing basic pre-flop strategy. But it was like somebody opened, and Ike flatted on the button, and then a break. The guy opened from like under the gun, and Ike told me the hand, and he was like, "Yeah, I had ace-8 off there," and I was like, "You called a under the gun raise with ace-8 off?" And then he was like, "Well, it's who's this guy, and like this guy's like opening like 9-8 off and ace-2 off, so he's basically opening like looser than a cutoff range." And I was like, "Yeah, fair enough, that makes sense to me." And I think through this idea that like some of the like very best players are like are constantly kind of playing their version of a game, of like a different game, where they're constantly trying to like exploit people and make their versions of kind of like counter exploits and hero plays and stuff like that. But it doesn't necessarily read that way, because they're like maybe a little more like subtle, and maybe those sorts of hands don't necessarily get seen as often.
Yeah, especially with highlights, right? They pick I would pick different hands than the editor of Triton would pick. I would be like, this is super interesting, and the guy just check folds flop and like, did you see that flat with ace 8 off on the button? Oh, it's so interesting. Why would they have done that? And they just want to see a big go in and someone busting and someone celebrating.
I mean, I say this as somebody who, like, the most watched hand I've ever played was getting my aces cracked in the main event, where, like, every year for the main event, like, the biggest hand is going to be some guy gets all in with aces and they lose, and it will get like 1 million views on YouTube and whatever. Can you believe it? He got aces all in and lost, and yeah.
Take a look at this hand that I played. Cutoff opens, I flat the bottom with 7-5 suited and the small blind comes along. We go to a flop of 6-5-4. Small blind checks and the cutoff makes a c-bet. Is this standard? I'm not really sure. Nowadays though, we can find out what is actually the correct strategy in multi-way pots due to a big update that GTO Wizard has released in which we can solve multi-way. Now the first thing that we notice is that the small blind is actually supposed to dunk 58% of the time. If it does go check towards the initial raiser, he should not be doing any c-betting, which kind of explains why the small blind wants to dunk. If it does c-bet, it's 1% of the time that he's supposed to do it. We can see that 5-7 is indeed sometimes okay to raise. However, the c-bet frequency is obviously not really representative for what I think we saw in game, so we can go over to the node lock function and up his c-bet frequency and see what that does to our strategy. Something that's interesting to note is that now the small blind went from dunking 58% to only dunking 33%. If the small blind does check and the cutoff c-bets, we can actually see that 7-5 suited now mainly prefers to call. This is probably partly due to the fact that the cutoff puts a lot of money in with quite strong hands, but mainly for the fact that the small blind is now checking way more hands towards him, and therefore we're up against two ranges that are actually pretty strong. So taking in consideration that I thought in game it was probably close to a range check, it's very easy to be over c-betting. Therefore I decided to raise the flop, blocking the main hands that villain could be happy with facing a raise, think if 5-6 suited, pocket 5s or 7-8. If he has an overpair, I think he's straight away in a tough spot, and even if he would call with an overpair, I still have a lot of outs. However, what I did not take in consideration in game is that the small blind, especially if he doesn't lead, maybe because he also thinks the cutoff is going to c-bet too much, is very much uncapped. If you combine all multi-way pots in your regular 6 max game, it actually is a pretty big contributor to your win rate. And if you play big anti-games or live, the number of multi-way pots that you're going to play is going to go through the roof. So given the frequency with which it's occurred, the fact that it's a little bit of a bigger pot than regular single race pots, and the fact that it's a very unexplored field makes studying multi-way a very big opportunity to gain an edge in today's games. So go check them out, gtowizard.com/mechanics to get 10% off of your first subscription. But without further ado, let's get back in today's episode.
You already mentioned Ike. I was curious, and you already mentioned in general right early in your career that you got in touch with the right people. Has there ever been like a coach or a specific study partner that has had a big impact on your career in any way? And what was kind of the most important lesson that this person has taught you?
I've never had formal coaching. I think what I tend to do more is I'll have a problem and then I'll ask somebody who I trust or like who, you know, about something, and then they'll tell me something and then it'll like lead me towards some sort of independent study project that I can do. Honestly, the reason I probably have never gotten formal coaching is because I got very lucky to just have like access to people. Like, so I visited Max, my brother in Vegas, when he was in the ship at Holla Balla House, and Galfond were there. And like at the time he was playing 300-600. And I would just like ask him questions about $22 sitting goes. Hands I played in $22 sitting goes, and he'd give me an answer. You know, so I'm like, why would I pay for coaching when this guy's giving me this for free? So I was always so lucky with that sort of stuff. You know, in terms of the person I've talked the most poker with, it's Luke, my twin, just because he's probably the person I've talked to the most about like everything. Yeah, anything. It also depends, you know, on like trips. You know what people are like Dan DeVos is somebody who I will like talk about poker with pretty regularly, but he's a guy who on trips when you're playing live tournaments, when he's on break, that is like 15 minutes he needs to like clear his head. He does not want to talk about poker. I understand that. That's like a reasonable thing. So in terms of that sort of stuff, yeah, sometimes it does just depend on the different people and their attitude and what they're like. But I've just been very lucky to have these resources at my disposal the whole time.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's asking advice from Gelfond. Yeah, I mean, what is a better source? You did start playing online, but nowadays you clearly prefer live poker. What is like the beauty of live poker for you? What does it bring compared to like online? I think you also already mentioned a bit earlier on as well that you don't play online anymore for various reasons. What makes you prefer the live grind nowadays?
The story I think I've whatever. I was going to say I think I've told on another podcast. No, it's an exclusive for you guys. Was shortly after my son was born, I played a Sunday and I bubbled 2 1Ks. Now this is also when he was like 2-3 months old, couldn't sleep through the night, whatever. And I bubbled 2 1Ks and I was like distraught. And I just kind of decided at this point in my life, it was too hard to play online with like a crying baby in the other room or just with my son in the house. I just found it too hard. Now, granted, before that, I still was playing less online, and that had to do with some regulatory things. PokerStars pulled out of Ontario, as did GG. So then if I want to play online, I need to travel. So then that became like a thing where it's like, okay, do I want to... I just played like live poker for 3 weeks. I'm not going to travel somewhere to play a Sunday. That would be crazy.
What about a scoop?
For like a scoop, yeah. For a scoop, I have my dad's side of the family is from Quebec. You can play PokerStars and GG from Quebec. We have a nice cottage there, so like that was nice. We went up there a couple times and played scoops and all that. You could go for like a swim in the lake beforehand and all that. Very nice. But again, now it's something where it's like, well, now I need to either leave my wife at home with our son or I need to take my son up to the cottage. If he were like 6, sure, that's fine. If we could get childcare there, he could like run around outside all day. He'd have a great time. So like it just life became harder for me to play online. And then live, it just felt like a different thing because there's such a like separation of church and state, You're like, I'm here, I'm on this island in Korea. One thing I do like about playing poker in Asia is when you wake up for like Eastern time zone, people are like asleep. Like this was the best of this was in Australia. But in Australia, you would wake up and you'd have like 3 hours where the only people in the world who could contact me were people in Australia. Like I wouldn't get any like messages about anything. Nothing. And it set me up, I think, well to play poker where you're just kind of on this island. And that's how I feel where like I could like, FaceTime in with my son or like see like whatever, but it's fine. It's doable. Like I can get to the point where I can focus, where I find it very hard to focus if he's just in the other room.
Yeah, I can definitely relate with that. That's kind of the beauty of, okay, you separate sort of a work trip. You're there, you focus, you kind of switch your mindset. And then at home, like how have you find that? Because like poker teaches you to be like this stoic, unemotionally available person. Yeah. And then suddenly you have to go in the other room and suddenly be a loving father.
Yeah, I'm curious how that will shape as he gets older and like he will like right now if he does something that upsets me, I'm full on like headbutts me or like something like that, which he might do from time to time, thrash me around. It hurts and I can deal with it because I can quickly access kind of like the rational part of my brain that like he doesn't know what he's doing, right? Now if I have like a 6-year-old who decides like it's fun to like take glasses out of the cabinet and throw them on the ground or something, or like some dumb destructive 6-year-old thing, I'm curious how my ability to access that like stoicness will go. But right now, like I just love him very much, and like he's a fun child. Like he's just like laughing and running around and like it's fun playing with him and all that. So when I'm angry, like of course he does things that upset me or anger me or frustrate me, but like I can't blame him for it. I don't know how I will feel when he gets to an age where I feel he should know better. You know, I hope I can maintain and like foreground my love for him. But then it also becomes tricky because then you also want to teach your kids how to behave. You know, you don't want to be an asshole. You don't want to be like a drill sergeant and you want to have a strong relationship with them, but you also need to teach them how to interact with the world. Like it's the whole thing I find with parenting thus far is like you should learn these skills that immediately evaporate. You know, like you have like a 3-month-old and you have like all these 3-month-old skills. Like this is how you heat a bottle and stuff. And now it's just like, he's 18 months. I'm like, did I ever heat a bottle in my life? You know, it just feels like it's gone. And I'm sure
you have to adjust quickly. Like my daughter is turning 2 soon. So basically the skills that you need per age, they differ quite a lot.
And then I know when he's like, whatever, 6, 8, 12, 14, whatever the thing is, it's just going to be, more flying blind and more learning. And it's like, it is, in addition to like the thrill of seeing him grow up, I think the thrill of like, you know, you changing with him is also going to be, is like, you know, beautiful.
Adam, maybe you can hop in there. What do you think are like some challenges that poker players generally face in relationships outside of the real world? I feel like we learn skills and that are very valuable in poker, and they translate well into other things as well. But specifically into relationship, emotions, what are kind of some things that in your experience players run into and how can they fix it?
Yeah, it's a good topic. I think a lot of poker players learn to be very rational and they learn to kind of maybe numb emotions, suppress emotions, hopefully deal with a lot of emotions in a good context. But I think often that can lead to lacking connection with other people who don't maybe share that same logical drive. So I know a lot of poker players feel a little bit isolated in terms of being able to connect with people, being able to connect in relationships. I think a challenge as well, like for online players in particular, as you mentioned, Rene, the challenge of going from a very cognitive, locked-in work mode to leaving the room and you've got your partner, maybe the baby, maybe a kid, who like immediately wants your attention and wants you to be loving and in the zone, and you're just in your mind replaying poker hands. And for a non-poker player, it's very hard to accept that you can't just be present in your environments. But poker players struggle with that kind of separation. So I think you've got to find a way to kind of think what person you want to be. Like we're all individuals, but we're all trying to bring certain character traits to situations. As a poker player, you can be shut off. You can be locked in your own head, just solving problems. But then when you're interacting in the real world, how are you showing up? And I think it's a skill that's very separate to poker is a skill. And you've got to learn that. So if you're someone who's struggling with this, you've got to look, okay, how am I showing up in my relationships? Is it a byproduct of transitioning from one environment to another? Or is it just because I haven't really learned the skill of basically empathy, of feeling emotions, of listening to somebody, of understanding someone else's kind of situation? So yeah, I think it's a challenging one, but I feel like it's one where you've got to maybe start to solve from a different lens rather than like trying to fix something, understand something. It's more like, how am I showing up, and how can I change the way I show up in certain situations? And yeah, I know for like online grinders, I feel like the people who struggle the most are high volume online grinders. If I look at those as a kind of demographic, those are the guys who like they spend so much of the time, get so rewarded for don't speak to anybody, no distractions, don't get in my headspace. I'm working today, and then they leave and they interact in the real world, and it's hard to kind of put that to one side and be a kind of outgoing person or even just interacting it in a certain way. So I think it's something every person's got to work on. Look at the relationships around you, look at your close relationships, how are you showing up in those relationships, how are your friends interacting with those, people outside of poker, how you interact with those as well. But yeah, I think if I would give one bit of advice, what works for me is having different offices, different spaces for different activities. I think for a poker player, if you can have an office space away from your house, ideally, that's amazing. If it's in your house, look at how you're moving from space to space within your house. Are you still in work mode? Just walking around your house still, bringing around your poker problems. But you got to find ways to kind of compartmentalize one part of your life to be able to show up in another. I do feel like for most players, especially the online players, they've got to work harder on that.
Yeah, the office thing definitely for me has always made a big difference. I remember also when you were talking about that, I had the office, and then I remember in Brendon Burchard's book, The High Performance Habits or something, he was talking about door triggers. So basically, as soon as you walk through the door, he was talking about, okay, so you walk through your office door and then you can use it as a trigger, like office door, okay, I'm going to be a cold killer. And then in home, when you walk through your door, he said door trigger, okay, you're a different version of yourself. And you kind of tap into different environments. It kind of helps you kind of shift. Okay, I come home now, I'm going to be present and loving and open and being and showing my emotions. And then when I go into the office, I switch again. Definitely some good stuff in there.
Yeah, I like that. It's basically being mindful that there's different versions of you that need to show up in different ways based on the situation. And if you don't consciously control that, you end up with whatever's dominant on your mind. For poker players, that's poker. So you go into your relationship, she's talking to you and you're just like, yeah, that hand, that should have bluffed and it didn't bluff. Yeah, what are you saying? Sorry, what are you saying? And you kind of just not really there. So I think finding ways to go, right, I need ways to shut that off and to be present in my other parts of my life. If you're not doing that, then yeah, you've got to kind of question, okay, what's high value to you right now? It is challenging. I know, like, we can speak about it, and I can picture in my early days, I struggled more and more with this because my mind just didn't want to switch off from poker, and I struggled to find that kind of space. But over time, I think finding ways to, as you said, like, show up in the new environments, create some sort of trigger to, okay, right now, I need to be more present, listen more. And yeah, I think that just working on that consciously is a big process.
Also, I think being conscious about like closing your session off. So, going over the hands that bothered you the most just to kind of process it, and probably in combination with, especially if it's a lot of hand, saying like, okay, I've looked at this and kind of like some acceptance. Okay, I blundered here, whatever. And then like, okay, tomorrow in the morning, I'm going to reserve the first hour to look at this. So you kind of, and you have already processed what really bothered you, and you know that, okay, I can let it go because tomorrow in the morning, I'm the first hour of my day, when I come back to the office, I'm going to look at it and start my session an hour later, whatever.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, it's like kind of a shutdown routine, right, for the brain, because the brain always like kind of revisits stuff that it thinks are important that haven't been closed properly. So you've got all these unclosed loops from your session. It's really hard just to like be present in your next environment without shutting that down. Sometimes like a browser where you've got all the tabs in the browser all across the top. You've got to close those all down to kind of create space there. So I think it's something you got to figure out for yourself what works for you. But yeah, that routine of shutting down and finding ways to the things that happen in the session, you're going to approach them later in your week or in a study session. I think is important for most players.
Yeah, I feel like the other dynamic with studying is it can always wait. Like, it's about you have this curiosity, this itch you want to scratch about did you blunder this hand. It doesn't matter if you look it up now or tomorrow or the next day, but it's about you wanting like closure because you're stressed. And like it's especially like live poker stops, these times where I've been like there at like 3 a.m, be like, okay, let's just look up one more hand, and then I'm like, but like it doesn't matter. You're not getting this exact hand tomorrow,
Yeah, so for you, how do you kind of deal with that when you have got that kind of urgency to want answers? What's kind of a balance you found with that?
I've found like that again. It's partially about like knowing myself. Like, hey, if I happen to bust a tournament at like 10 p.m. or something, re-entry is closed. It's like, okay, now I actually do have, if I want, like, plenty of time to scratch every itch and look at every hand. And then like sometimes it depends on the hand, because sometimes it truly is a spot where I just want to go like, okay, like if this hand a good bluff catch on the river, and sometimes it's a whole other different thing of being like, okay, I actually need to study this spot and dig into it, and I'm not really sure how it works or how it's supposed to work, and this is kind of like a longer project. And you look at like a sim and you'll be like, well, this is a little off, like I need to use different sizing, whatever I need to do some node locking, I need to actually think about it. It again ties into the thing about time management, knowing how much time you have, making a correct estimate about how long it'll take to dive into it. And, again, like jet lag is always a big deal. So like if I'm in Europe, I'm just like, well, like I'm realistically probably not going to sleep until like 2 or 3 in the morning, even if I try as hard as possible. When like Asia, like I could go to sleep right now. So it is about the different stops, knowing what's going on. And I think the other thing about like tournaments are a little different, where like cash, the hand you play in the first hand of the session might be just as important as the hand you play in the last hand of the session. Well, tournaments escalate in such a way where you will find yourself being like, oh, like this hand was so important for me this was the climax of my day. This, like, had I won this hand, I'd still be playing now. And I think that's the hard part where you like to tell yourself, like, no, it's okay. You can wait till tomorrow for this one. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, I never thought of that in terms of, for tournament players, the end point's always quite a big event. It's either a win or it's a loss that kind of could have cost you your tournament life. So the mind's going to like kind of really anchor itself to that last hand. So find a way to kind of close that off for yourself. And having a system in place, as you mentioned there, sometimes you just want a quick answer. Was it a good play? Was it a bad play? And other times you want to go down the rabbit hole and kind of identifying, is this the right time to go into a deep study session, or can I close this in a quicker way to kind of let the minds relax a bit?
Yeah.
What have been some of the harder ones for you to let go of? Have there been any situations in the last few years where you've been like struggling to switch the mind off, maybe struggling to get to sleep because there's been a big bust out or a big hand that's been on your mind? It's been quite hard to get closure.
The number one for me in terms of like closure was, I mean, it's just a bad beat, but like the hand, I busted the main event in 45th in a chip lead pot. And like the main event is just this whole other stakes. Like you know, like the story I tell is I busted the hand and my dad the next day went to the mechanic to like get his oil change or whatever, and he's like, I saw your son got his aces cracked, you know? Like that's how big a deal it was. And like, yeah, like the other ones were like, yeah, like I had the big hand was Vladimir Korzinin and Triton Monaco were like, I don't know if people are familiar with it, but the Gambledore was his name, and he's a Estonian guy who I think made a bunch of money in finance and was playing very like unconventionally and kind of like making big bets or whatever. And we were 1-2 at chips at the final table of the 150K in Monaco. He raised under the gun. I defended ace-5 of clubs. Flops 10-4-2, 2 clubs. Check. He overbets the flop. He covers me by a little bit. I have like 35 blinds and just stick it in. And he like thinks like 10 seconds of calls with queens and I'm out of there. And in terms of the hand, I think it was punt of the day 101 or 100. I forget which one. Like I did some like sort of like soul searching about it. And like could I have just called? Could I have done something different? And like the thing about that hand is, again, the tournament dynamics where you're not as much as you'd like to think you are, you're not prepared to play that part sort of psychologically. You're like, we're 1-2 in chips. I understand there's a chance we'll get all in versus each other. You know, that's how poker works. But in my head, I'm like, well, like these 3 people will bust first, you know? And like that was one where it was also a weird dynamic because the final table started at like 1. The next day's tournament started at 2. I busted by like 1:30. I went from like chip lead to second to chip 2 out by 1:30. And then the poker room is empty. In terms of like the psychology of like, oh, could I have done something different? That's part of it. But also like it's something that again, if we start where I started about with punt of the day, like the sense memory of it all is so strong to me. Where like I also made a dicey 4-bet at that final table where I just 4-bet bluff, not all in, where I just ran into ace king. I don't think of that hand the same way, and that hand was a much more like potentially like bad hand. I think there's always this element in like tournaments where like, you know, there's just this positive momentum as you progress through a tournament, and then just your legs are cut out from under you, and you'll just always feel that and remember that. In terms of like recent memory, like a lot of like the big hands I've played at final tables outside of those ones are just kind of like, I had jacks and the other guy had kings or whatever, which is unfortunate, but I think I was supposed to stack off with my jacks, you know, like those kinds of hands. Because again, the reality is like a lot of the Triton tournaments, there is not a ton of play at the final tables. Yeah, like it is just about kind of like winning the all-ins, you know.
So with that ace-5 hand, was the biggest challenge being because you weren't sure the best strategy in that moment, like you could have flatted there instead of raising all in, or is it because of like just the enormity of the emotion of the experience? Your heads up with this guy who's aggressive opponent. Was it more the situation or the how you played the hand?
I think it was the fact that he is like a VIP. He plays very, I say unpredictably, but the reality is a lot of these players do play quite predictably in such a way. So in my mind, I kind of thought the way he was playing, he just kind of c-bet a lot. He c-bet to like a big size. I thought he might play a hand like ace-king like this. I thought he might play a hand like eights like this. And if he did have eights or ace-king, he would never call a shove. That was what my thinking was. And then the fact that he had queens and he called without really thinking too hard about it. Not that like I expected him to fold. Then I started going, well, like, was there like something in his body language and his physical presence and his whatever that I should have been able to find the answer? And that's kind of the thing that like keeps me up. Sometimes there are spots where I just like go, oh, I just made the wrong read. That was a bad play. That was stupid of you. I wish I did the other thing and I had more money. But it doesn't keep me awake because there's no like mystery. I think the thing that I found difficult about this hand was I'm like, I made the assumption that he would play pocket eights like this, and I'll never know, you know. He'd fold, and I'll never know.
Yeah, so it's basically the puzzle that didn't get solved, and maybe you expecting yourself in that moment to have picked up more information, or at least have questioned, could I have done more in that situation to pick up more so I could make a better decision and make the correct read.
Yeah, and honestly, like, he is a guy who, like, there are VIPs who I play with who I have a very strong, like, specific reads on. And some of them would, like it's a guy who bluffs a lot. And I'm like, but they never bluff on this board. They would never bluff like this, right? And he's a guy who I just, from the jump, I never really had too strong a read on him. So, like he played a hand earlier in that tournament where he boat overboated Makita in, like, level 1. And I talked to Dan DeVos about it on break, and he's like, yeah, I think Makita could have folded the boat. Because I know how he plays, and he wouldn't bluff like that. And to me, I was just like, whatever, man. Like, I was like, I went up to Dan on break, and I said, I can't believe Makita, like, used so many time banks and thought so long. I would have just snap called. And then when Dan said, like, no, he would never bluff there, I gave it a lot of credit because Dan's very observant with that stuff. So, like, he was a guy from the jump. Hey, never, like, hero fold to this guy. Hey, like, you could reshove wide on him because he, like, opens loose pre-flop. Like, those sorts of things, sure, fine. But in terms of, like, trickier, more specific exploits in a hand like this, I just never had, like, kind of, like, the right read on him. So that's the other one where I'm like, I think even Fador mentioned something about, like, after the fact, like, I had a read on him that he was strong that hand. And I was like, well, if and Fador was at the final table, to be clear. He wasn't just like, you know, like, hey, when I saw it on stream or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of the other one. Like, for a hand to, like, haunt me, it's like, okay, I got all in this giant pot with, like, 53% equity. You know, like, it's like, in terms of, like, punts, it's not that big. Yeah, no, I mean, it is one of the hands where, like, because I didn't, like, my solution to that hand was pretty simple in game, I guess. Which is, this guy bets a lot. He bets big sizes often. I think I can get him to fold something. I have a monster draw. I'm all in. And I'm curious if, other people, you know, would have had different, could have, like, unlocked the puzzle maybe a little more complex than I did. Like, my solution was pretty simple.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of players can relate to that as well. Like, feeling like you missed something. So it's almost like it comes down more to you rather than, like, kind of how the situation played out. And it's like, in those situations, you can be quite hard on yourself because obviously in hindsight we can go, oh, I should have known this and I should have known that, but in that moment, like you said, you didn't have a clear read on him. You didn't really know exactly what he was up to, so you kind of simplified your strategy based on a few heuristics. And I think it's really hard for the mind to come to terms with the fact that other players maybe picked something up earlier, someone knew that he was up to something, someone felt he was strong. Then you can be, like, really hard on yourself in terms of that moment in time. So yeah, very, very interesting. All right, I would like to do a bit of reflecting now on your career, so looking back and trying to take some lessons from it. So as a whole in your poker career, what would you say is the most important lesson poker's taught you? Specifically with tournament poker, I think the fact that in order to get really good at something, it just requires a lot of failure. Like, you're doing something where the payoffs are so asymmetrical. And I think teaching you that resilience is very important because most people do not necessarily have that
if you take a safer career path, like you won't learn to be resilient in the same way. Which honestly, like it could be for the best too, you know. But it's definitely something I've learned and strengthened.
How do you learn resilience? How do you make sure you're growing stronger from events rather than being broken by them?
I think there's just a point where you have to say, like, I'm still standing here. I can still get up. Like, and yeah, if you are broken by it, I think you know on some level, and then you quit. And I think the fact that you could progress and still get through it is the sign that you aren't.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out in terms of anything you do to make sure you are able to keep getting up. Because if you look at resilience, it reminds me of the book Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. And he talks about kind of breakable, robust, and anti-fragile. And anti-fragile is the things that grow stronger from adversity. So if we look at how we go through life, we want to take on challenges, take on stress, and grow stronger because of it. Like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger approach, which is great. When people rise to the top, you often see that's true. But you have someone else who's exposed to the same stimulus, the same stresses, the same environments, and they're just a mess. They just crumble. They just can't deal with it. Generally, mentally, they get overwhelmed by it. So for you, what are some of the things you lean on when things get really tough to make sure you take that next step, that next action, and you keep getting back up?
I think the thing that I'm good at is like when I'm stressed, when I'm tired, when I'm whatever, it all affects me, but I can get to the point where it affects me less. You know, when I'm tilted. All these things. And I think there's like a lot of examples of this in the world where, like a good example is if you look at like, like in like sports and look at how like certain people do versus the best, right? They don't actually do like better. They just do not worse, you know? They go from and that I think is just this huge thing where like when you're under this stress, when you're under this pressure, if you can play you don't need to be so locked in that under immense stress you can play your A game. If you can play your B game under immense stress, you're ahead of the curve because most other people are playing their C or D game. I think I'm good at like getting to my B game no matter what.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've never really heard it described that way, but it makes a lot of sense in terms of what you're highlighting there is stress makes a lot of people crumble and it kind of lowers performance for a lot of people. You do get the anomalies, the Michael Jordan type characters who seem to just rise to the occasion and use kind of performance pressures as a way to increase performance. But if you look across the board, generally stress lowers performance for a lot of people in terms of struggling to deal with stuff, struggling to perform their best. So if you can just show up and play well in that environment, you're often going to do very well. It reminds me, I did a paddle tournament a few weeks ago. It was like the biggest one in Bali. And when you warm up with some players, like they look really good. You're like, wow, this guy's got so much slice, so much power in his overheads. You're like, oh, we're in trouble here with these guys. Then you get into the game dynamics and you're like, where were those attacking shots? And it's those kind of players where they kind of cage up under pressure. They don't play their game when the stress is on. So we just played a very solid game and their game dropped and we were able to beat them. So I think it's that kind of reminder sometimes just being able to show up, play your B game consistently, not have big drop-offs. Obviously, you want to ideally play your best in kind of high-pressure scenarios, but that's not always realistic. So yeah, for you, in terms of like being able to do that in a kind of practical way, what are some of the things like you... we've mentioned habits, we've mentioned preparation, but in terms of being at the tables, what are some of the things you kind of take note of to make sure you're constantly at least playing that B game for you?
Number one for me, if I don't do it enough, is like, but like not on my phone is like a big one. But I will say there are times where I can feel myself getting very like stressed. A good example, there was a time where I was on a bubble of a PLO tournament in Monaco and like Scott's evil with the chip leader, and I understood like conceptually like the way this bubble was going to go is I could not play any hands and Scott got to pot every hand, and I just like played a stupid game on my phone because I'm like, you're done. This will like give you this like the dopamine drip that will like calm you down. You like the only thing you can do here is do something stupid and like try to play back. Once I got in the money, things changed, obviously. I think that one of the big things that helped me though is by having like a good fundamental baseline, it helps you access what is the best play. You know, especially because in shot clock tournaments, I mean online too, you need to do it under time constraints. And like I know one of the first punt of the days I wrote was about like number, I forgot, it was a hand I played in Paris. I forget the number, but and what happened was we're on the bubble of the 50K. We're 2 off the bubble of the 50K. I open the cutoff with ace-10 suited. Tom is Moolock who 3-bets the button. Or 3-bets the big blind. I call. We play this large-ish pot where I'm like worried. Maybe I'll get stacked. Maybe I won't. Like, it's a lot of tough decision points. Thomas is an intense player. I check. Back the river. I win the hand. Next hand, I get aces. And, like, I raise, and my heart is still, like, pumping from the hand before, and I may or may not have misplayed my aces the next hand, and they got cracked, and I lost a big pot. But I think generally you have the ability in poker tournaments to, like, you might not play a hand for 3 minutes. You can take a walk. You can have a water. You can do these physiological things to calm yourself down. And then, like, the real opportunities where you can't is, I think, like, the really hard part. You know, like another one is like, you know, the classic, you value bet the river and you're like very confident you have the best hand, and like you sort of quit a little on the hand where you're like, this guy won't check shove, you know, and then they do, and then you're just like, you go from being like calm because you're value betting, you're like, I have the best hand, it's good, I have this pot, and then you get shoved on, and the first thing like you need to do is calm yourself, like. That's the first thing I like try to do is I'm like, I need to calm myself down because I'm not thinking. And then in shot clock tournaments, you're like, okay, I need to calm myself down. And then you just hear like 10, 9, 8, 7. And you're like, this is not calming me down at all. So yeah, like having strong fundamental baselines help you because then you don't necessarily need to waste all do or like spend as much energy on that sort of stuff. But ideally, yeah, a lot of times, you know, tournament poker, you do have time. Online is obviously different, but like live, you do have time to try to get yourself settled, calm yourself down, take a walk, like stretch, whatever, and that could help a lot.
Yeah, but the way you explain that as well, I think it just shows like even when you play a long time, poker's still stressful. Like you still have moments where your nervous system just feels like under threat. It's like a kind of fight or flight response, and your body will flood with adrenaline, flood with cortisol, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what do I do here? You feel a bit shocked in those moments. I feel like it's finding ways to get more control in those moments to like kind of navigate it better, but also like realizing it's part of the experience of being a poker player. Like you're going to have those type of moments where you just are a little bit overloaded. The spot's a bit tricky. You're in the stress is high. So for you, like how have you learned to get better at those? I'm sure like how you deal with that now compared to maybe 10 years ago is very different. Is it something like experience? I find a lot of things like with the nervous system, if you put yourself in stressful situations like for long periods of time, you build a kind of track record with yourself. I can handle this. I'm okay. The nervous system calms down a bit because you're kind of giving it like that validation with the mind that you're okay. For you, do you feel like experience has helped you to kind of navigate those peak moments more, or do you still feel like there's something that's is challenging there?
A big thing is getting more comfortable with if not like the stakes, but like the game conditions. Like you're like, I've done this before, I've been here before, so you're less likely to get that extreme kind of cortisol spike. I think especially with things like shot clock tournaments, the actual mechanics of like having played shot clock tournaments before help. You can like immediately go, okay, I have a lot of time banks. How many time banks am I willing to spend on this hand? Like you can start asking yourself those sorts of questions, which as opposed to, you know, seeing like the dealer go like 5, 4, 3, 2. You can say like, you know, I feel more comfortable now being like, hey, could you please not count in the time banks to the dealers? Like things like that. And then the other thing is, again, like a lot of it, you want it to be rational, where you want these spikes to be correlated with like the stakes of the pot. But there were times where I've like played like a 3K and like for whatever reason I'm like, this pot is the most, like my body is telling me this is the most important pot you'll play all year. Like it doesn't make sense, but it just feels that way. You know, I even talked to like Lucky Chewy about that. And yeah, he's like, yeah, sometimes you're like just happen to be like extremely calm in an 100K, and sometimes you happen to be extremely amped up in a 1K, and like you'd like your body and your physiological response to follow some sort of rational pattern, but they don't. So I think it's just generally being more comfortable helps, and like every way, because like you're less likely to get the cortisol spike, you're more likely to handle it better, you're better at understanding like the mechanics of the tournament, like how much time do I have left, how much time do I have to get ready. If you're poker theory is stronger, you're better at like cracking the case of the hand, so I think again it's all about kind of like floor raising and preparation and stuff like that, because I know there are people who do it the other way, where they're like they practice hitting these moments of high stress and dealing with it. Well, for me it is just more about floor raising, being more comfortable, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like widen your range of stress tolerance so you can kind of handle more and more. How important is it to understand your tendencies in these moments? Let's say that exact example where someone raises the river and you feel like an overload of your body. And I think for some players, like they'll freeze and kind of get passive and go, oh, not sure what to do. And they'll lean towards a kind of passive tendency. Other players kind of fight aggression with aggression. When they're not sure, they start trying to figure out how they can stand up for themselves. They make it more personal. They think this player's trying to make a move on them. How important is it to like kind of kind of build a sample with yourself and understand, okay, in these moments, I'm likely to lean towards this kind of action, which is more like kind of primal protective, and be aware of that so I can deviate across that. Have you had to do any work with it yourself in terms of gravitating towards either overly aggressive in those spots or overly passive, and having to kind of be aware of that going into them before they happen?
I think every spot is like a little too different, and it depends on the player and it depends on this. I am like, now that you mention it, I am curious. I'm trying to think in my head if I lean more one way than another. And again, I think sometimes you just, I don't know. I think it just depends. But the worst kind of most like negative thought I can have in this specific situation is kind of like a woe is me. Like, oh, of course they live with a straight, like whatever dynamic. That's kind of the worst one. And that's the one, if there's one I like try to avoid, it's it. Even at like live poker tables, sometimes you can kind of like, I've noticed myself guilty of it, but I notice other people do it as well, where like the people kind of like look around the table almost, where they're like, man, doesn't this fucking suck for me that this guy like shoved over my like river bet, And the other one is like, generally when I am locked in, if we're talking about this exact spot, somebody raising on the river, like you are thinking before you bet. Like you should be thinking, what do I do if he raises, and not just like, please don't raise, please don't raise, please don't raise, like especially in a time-based tournament, like when the other person's acting, that is time that you have to think that you are not paying for, and you should be trying to use it well.
Yeah, I think that's good advice, having a game plan in advance and trying to navigate it as it comes up. So for you, what's your definition of success, and how has that changed as you've had more of it?
I think it used to be like, I will be able to say I am like the best poker player in the world. And I think poker is not like tennis, where like the gap between like 1 and 10 is this giant gulf. And I think I've reached a point where like for me to say I'm like in the conversation or whatever is acceptable. And then my idea of success now becomes about, how can I create a life in poker where I can keep playing, where I can stay in action, where I can remain one of the best, where I can still have a strong family life, where I can do all these things. And then like with the Substack, like that is a big thing of what I've been trying to do, was I was like, well, like, let's say how much money could I make in a year from poker without playing a hand, right? And I'm like, if I can get to the point where I could say at the beginning of the year, like, hey, like I can cover all our expenses, we can go on vacation, I can put money into a college fund, those sorts of things. To me, that is like success, where you've created a framework where like, cause like to some degree, more than some degree, gambling with the family is borderline irresponsible. You can scale it, but like, if I needed to eat like whatever ramen for the rest of my life, I'm fine with it, right? If my son did, no, I would not want that for him. So I think the question of like, I've thought about this just, even when we were talking about the conversation about the different spaces in your house, where like so much of kind of like when you start playing poker as a teenager, you go, okay, well, like, how can I do this and make money? And then you go, how can I do this and make money and provide for myself? And then you have a wife or like a girlfriend, and you're like, okay, how can I do this while living with her and having a healthy life? How can I do this while like building a strong relationship? And then like you keep adding these more things on it. And I got to the point where for me, I still have this competitive fire. I still think I'm an excellent poker player, but finding the way to like balance it all in a way that's like safe and responsible and like secure and where I'm like a provider is significantly harder to me than like closing the gap between me and like Stevie. Even if that also could be wrong. Like it's possible that Stevie, because of his like work ethic and his whatever, that I'd never be able to catch him. But in my mind, like closing that gap at this moment in time for me feels like an easier thing to do because it's something I've been working on for so long and trying to build it all within like a structure where I can like, you look at somebody like Eric Seidel, who is like, he's a grandfather now. He has his own children, he's at a happy marriage. He went to Taipei to play the APT. Something like that is much more like aspirational for me than being somebody who 10 years from now people will go, oh, he was really good. Remember him? He was really good.
Yeah, super interesting. I think it kind of shows the evolution of you as a person, how a lot of things players follow the same path where at first it's quite a selfish solo pursuit to make money, achieve things for yourself, and then you start create a life around that, which often includes other people. Then your health starts coming into it, relationships, family, and now all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, poker was so simple back in the day. I used to just grind all day and it was this easy thing. And now I've got this whole complicated life thing where everything feels important, and you're almost like maybe a little bit envious at times, like looking back at your younger self going, God, he had it so easy. He was just grinding all day. But yeah, I think it's understanding yourself at a higher level and really understand your values as a person and realizing for most of us, obviously this is generalized, for most of us, we don't want to sacrifice everything for that one thing, to be like the number one at one thing at the cost of everything else. Most of us don't want to pay that price. It's not really the life we aspire to. Maybe it does for a Michael Jordan character or people who are clearly at the top and have clearly sacrificed the whole bag of tricks for it, but most of us aren't trying to get there. And I think it's really good to not create role models who you can't aspire to in that way. Like, don't put someone on a pedestal who you're not willing to match that intensity in terms of sacrifice and everything else. Then also, as you mentioned, like other role models for you right now, people who've got longevity, got families, still have a nice balanced life, still do the live stops in the 70s, 80s. Like, that's a more aspiring goal because it aligns more with how you value life and the more complex game of your values. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation. I'm glad you answered it that way. It's not normally the avenue that opens up. I think it's a very big part of success in terms of creating the life you want.
I remember the advice I heard somebody say, which was like, if you envy somebody's life, you can't trade one thing. You need to trade for it all. So it's just like oh, I wish I had Jeff Bezos' money. It's like, well, then you need to have this and this and this and this and this. Like, you can't just get the money and nothing else.
Exactly, yeah. And you look at any individual, you very quickly see character flaws. You very see things you don't like. You go, he doesn't have good relationships, doesn't do this, he's unhealthy, whatever it is. But we very much pick one attribute from one person, then another one from another one. We put them all together and we're like, I wish I could just be this superhero who's rich, who's healthy and got this perfect relationship. So yeah, I think it's a good thing to try and balance. Rene, for you, how have you had to redefine your definition of success since you've been a father?
Poof. Still redefining. Yeah, like it's actually funny because I definitely struggle with like some conflicts where it's like, fuck, in the past it was so easy, right? The decision was just like, yeah, I'm going to focus on poker. And it was very clear what was important to you. And now I feel way more like being pulled left and right because like, yeah, but that's also important. Wait, but now this is also important. That I actually also think is important. So I need to kind of, I guess, clear up my values, and I feel like everything is now kind of, I find everything important or not important at the same time, so it's a bit less clear than it used to be. But actually, I was going to say, Adam, you can basically wrap it up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, cool.
You don't need to put it back to me. I mean, we go for 3 hours, so I think it's fair. Cool. I think it's fair we wrap it up. Yeah.
All right, Sam, we've had a long conversation today. We thank you a lot for your time. What would you like to be the main takeaway for someone listening today to walk away from this conversation with?
Oh, man. Okay, well, the first thing I will say at the very end, I said this when it was on the GTO Lab podcast, but if you made it to the end of the 3 hours here, please subscribe, www.puntoftheday.com. If you were willing to listen to me talk about stuff for 3 hours, then you will truly want to subscribe. I think the main thing is, like, you know, whether it's poker or life or whatever, that it is really important to have this balance, which means part of that does mean, there will be times where, like, some great games are going on and you need to play poker 100 hours a week. But, you know, somebody's been doing this for a long time, like, burnout is real, and you need to, if you're just playing for yourself, if you're just playing, like, for selfishness, if you don't have friends, if you don't have family, if you don't have, like, a life outside of poker, like, things are going to get really hard at some point in your life, and you'll be missing the fact you have that safety net. You know, it's like, and you can't catch up on it either. It's not like if you just don't go to the gym for like 3 years that you can just work out every day for like 3 weeks and then it's like, don't worry, I figured it out, I'm fine. So yeah, like the hard part, I say this as I'm like 37 and I'm giving advice like I'm fucking 75. But like the hard part of life is, as you get older, there's more balls you need to juggle, and that really becomes the hard part of it. So, you know, build up lots of areas in your life so it doesn't feel hectic.
Love that. Yeah, I think on top of that as well, like, try to enjoy each season. Each season's different. We're in one season, but we want to be in a different one. Whenever else, like, life's giving you the season you're in, try to understand for yourself what your seasons are and the kind of values you have and the things that are important over time. If you can do that and then enjoy the kind of process you're going through, trying to figure it out. Also realize not a single person has a clue what they're doing. We're all completely clueless, winging it, going, oh, what the hell's going on? And we think we're the only ones struggling. There's not a single person who's not trying to juggle a lot of stuff and trying to figure out their direction in life. So you're not alone. You've got 7 billion people also on the same struggling, winging it path. So yeah, I think that's a good reminder to not seek perfection, to kind of align stuff. So yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation, Sam. Thank you so much for spending 3 hours with us. We're definitely going to check out your Substack, and hopefully the audience as well will be signing up for that.
All right. Yeah. Nice meeting you guys, and yeah, I had a good time. Good chat.
What a great conversation that was. Thank you very much again, Sam, for coming on. Adam, what were your main takeaways of today's conversation?
Yeah, lots of good topics today that we went deep on. The first one, which I found interesting, was when you were talking about mistakes and his relationship with mistakes. He's obviously got his new kind of blog where he does Punt of the Day, which is a unique way to share his regular mistakes. And what I was getting from listening to him speak is a healthy relationship with make mistakes and treating them as a valuable part of learning. And it's one of those things that we all know this kind of intuitively, but often mistakes are this thing where in the moment of them happening, we judge ourselves. I think judgment is the obstacle we need to get past. But when we learn to see mistakes as literally part of the learning process, like they're needed to get better. We can't get better without making mistakes, and just soften that kind of judgment in the moment, we can start to get a healthy relationship with mistakes. And I think for a lot of players, maybe they could take inspiration from Sam, maybe share their punt of the day, maybe have a little journal where they kind of have changed their relationship with mistakes so they're less triggered by them, they feel less judgment, they feel less intensity around them. I think that's something I was reflecting on as you were speaking about that topic. Next thing was risk. I think we covered risk from a very different angle today in terms of not only how much risk you're able to take, but also your risk over time. He mentioned during COVID, games got really crazy for him, and he's basically put himself in a situation where he's taking on more risk in a shorter space of time than he was used to, and that created a lot of stress and put him under a lot of pressure. And I think when you're taking on risk, you've got to understand for yourself each moment of your life, based on financial pressure, based on your age, based on what's going on in your life, how much risk you can take on for that current chapter of your life over a current time period. I think it's something for everyone to reflect on for themselves, how much risk you're taking. And then he talked about maybe a little bit of envy or regret in terms of some people who took on more risk, maybe getting to more success financially. But then we also talked about how there's always outliers in terms of people who take more risk. There's going to be lots of people who fail on that pursuit, and then some people who become the kind of role models because they've had the confirmation bias of success. So I think it's just being very careful. And obviously, Sam's approach has been much more of a risk aversion and very solid approach, and it's allowed him to play 20 years maybe 10 plus years at the highest stakes. So yeah, I think if you want to replicate that and have a long career, there's definitely lessons from Sam's approach there. Next one I wrote down was performance under stress. And this was interesting in terms of, even if you play the highest level for a long period of time, your body still responds to that stimulus. You still feel activated. You still have moments where you malfunction a little bit, where you feel a threat response. And I think as Sam was talking there, he's talking in terms of it's a constant challenge to try and stay locked in, to try to make sure you're performing at your best under pressure. He also talked about how his approach is generally to raise his floor. So he's basically more prepared. He's more in a better state going into the sessions, and that allows him to not get pulled off as much by stressful events. He mentioned for him as well that he often can take it easy at the start of a tournament, and then he knows anytime he needs to, he can lock in. I found that interesting as well in terms of pacing. Like if you look at a high stakes player who's playing a 15-day series, they can't be 10 out of 10 focused for 10 hours every day. They've got to find ways to almost like recover a little bit, then go hard again. And I think for yourself, you've got to figure out, how can I turn it on when it matters most? I think this is more important for tournament players because you're going to play long sessions, and then all of a sudden everything hinges on this final table. Are you switched on? Can you lock in when you need to? So I think it was a very interesting conversation around pacing, altering your states, things to relax yourself, but also things to increase your overall intensity. I think was a good conversation. Then finally on success, we talked about his journey, which has led him from achievements and recognition in poker more towards balance and living kind of a life EV in terms of getting things in alignment. I think all of us are, whether we know it or not, we're playing the bigger game of life and trying to balance that. We might be singular focused for a period of time, but there's a bigger game going on. And the overall goal is to figure out what's important to you, find peace on that path, enjoy the day-to-day life you live, and realize it's never going to be perfect, but it's going to be your best guess of like what you should be doing. So yeah, I found that interesting in terms of how we went from a success angle into a more balanced approach. How about yourself, Rene? What was the main takeaways for you?
Yeah, actually, I like what you said. I encourage everyone in their Discord groups or whatever you use to open like a Punt of the Day channel, where you kind of, instead of posting all the cool things that you done, put like, oh, this hand I really learned something from. This was definitely the biggest mistake I made today. So let's see if this, if we can spread the Punt of the Day fever amongst help spread the Punt of the Day fever amongst the poker community. I liked in the beginning what he said about mistakes. Obviously, there's emotion around it, but he used that frustration as fuel, right? To get active with it. Instead of just complaining about it or being frustrated about it, he turned that frustration into something useful, right? For example, we were talking about getting angry at your opponent, and he gave the example, I think, if Panikov shows up with Queen 3 offsuit or whatever, he says, okay, I can be like, oh, what an idiot, blah, 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 but that's not helping me. So instead, I should be thinking, okay, well, if he does this with Queen 3 off, what is the opportunity that arises here, right? So I think that was definitely a worthy mention there. Later, we talked a lot about solvers, how that kind of impacted his career. And especially, again, it came out in how he uses the solver, right? And how you look at it, that kind of depends on if you get encouraged by it or discouraged by it. If you see the opportunities or the threats, like I said, people can say, oh, it's very boring. But when you ask him, no, it's not boring at all. I mean, come on, just look at all the things that you can learn from it, right? But it really depends on your perspective and how you use it. Also, we talked a little bit about being observant, like you don't have to necessarily do it yourself, but if you play against good players, see what they're doing and be like, oh, interesting, why would they do that? And then maybe look at the solve afterwards if this is a thing. I think he gave the example of this ace-jack hand that he played himself, and then I gave him that comment, and later a hand that OTB played. And that's kind of where he learned like valuable concept. It was actually very similar to how I learned a lot of the solver concept, simply by playing against better players and being put in certain spots and then reflecting on it like, hey, what does this strategy try to do, or how does that make my range uncomfortable or whatever? You know, there's a lot of things you can learn from just playing against good players who work with the solver. You might not even have to work so intensively with it yourself. We talked a little bit about current meta and about changes of meta. He wrote down overrated skill. If you learned that population tendency is to overfold, to then apply that knowledge to the high roller field, for example, he said. Then you're kind of missing the point, right? The MDA that you get out of online mid stakes will not necessarily straight away transition over to high rollers. An underrated skill on the other side was read on VIPs. And in the end, about the evolution in solver, he said it ended up with a hybrid style. But then he talked about if you, in terms of how hard you want to go after exploit, I think he said if you can get a quarter, but he would then notice maybe it's better to take a penny every time, right? So soft exploit, I think that's also how it's usually called in the poker environment. So yeah, great conversation. I want to thank Sam again for coming on. I want to thank Adam for co-hosting this podcast with me. If you want to work with me and Adam in our Mechanics of Poker coaching program, mechanicsofpoker.com, you can use the link in the description to apply there. Have us help you realize your full potential as a poker player. I want to thank our sponsors, GTO Wizard, Going Poker. Go check them out. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next episode.